Welcome, everyone, to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Policy Session on December 18, 2024. COO Nancy Bush is sitting in for our County Administrator Gary Schmidt this morning. Welcome, Nancy.
Yes, good morning. So we have all commissioners here today except for Commissioner Schrader, who is out of the office today. And first up, we have a presentation on the National Flood Insurance Potential Compliance Measures. Presenting today is Dan Johnson, the Department Director for DTD, and Jennifer Hughes, who is our Planning Director. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Chair Smith and Commissioners, we have been here a number of times talking to you about some decisions that we have to make regarding our flood development code and the implementation of that code and its impacts towards the federal flood insurance program. We are here to make a recommendation on a path forward, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Hughes, who actually knows in great detail about this option that we're going to present to you, and we're here and excited to share it. So with that, Jennifer.
Good morning, Commissioners. Again, I'm Jennifer Hughes, the Planning Director. I want to start just by saying, why are we here? What's the high-level reason we're here? We are here to request direction from the board on whether to proceed with implementation of new requirements associated with continued National Flood Insurance Program participation, and if so, which option the board would like to select for us to move forward with. As Dan mentioned, we've been here to talk to you previously. We shared some information, some background about how we got here when we had a policy session on November 7th. Essentially, starting back in about 2016, based on some litigation against FEMA, that sort of started the ball rolling on this, where we've gotten to the point that local governments in Oregon have been directed to implement some new regulations to protect endangered species in floodplains. So there's about 16 species that have been listed, fish and some killer whales in southern Oregon, that it's been determined by the National Marine Fisheries Service that development in the floodplain is a threat to those species, and so therefore development in floodplains needs to be done differently in order to ensure that we're not jeopardizing those species further. So that's how we got here. A number of local governments, over 200 in Oregon, were directed to select from 3 options and to implement those, that option by December 1st. That was FEMA's directive. So at your November 7th policy session, you directed staff to do 3 things. To conduct a detailed technical and legal analysis of 2 of the 3 options. We took one off the table, which was prohibiting all development in the floodplain. That one we decided not to proceed with. But the other 2, which are a model code and what is called site-by-site habitat assessment. Staff has been doing that research since the November 7th session. You also directed us to submit a draft implementation schedule for our compliance measure to FEMA. We have done that. And you directed us to return to the board for a policy session, and that's today. So we could actually consider selection between those 2 remaining options. Then at issues later in November, you approved the letter to FEMA telling them what we were going to do and attaching the draft implementation schedule. That draft schedule would put the county into compliance with these requirements approximately May of 2025. So in between that time, we are going to need to do something on an interim basis in order to minimize risk to the county of non-compliance with the Endangered Species Act. Essentially, what the letter that you approved told FEMA is that in that interim period from December 1st until May, or whenever we finally adopt something, that the applicant will come to us for a floodplain development permit, and as part of our decision, if we approve that permit, there will be a condition that says the applicant needs to actually go directly to National Marine Fisheries Service and either get a permit from them or confirmation that they don't need a permit. So that's our proposal, and that's what we told FEMA, the board letter. The letter that the board directed DTD to send told FEMA that that was going to be our approach. So that's where we're sitting right now. Now we're back to actually talk to you about which of these 2 remaining options you'd like to choose between. Based on staff's research and additional technical webinars conducted by FEMA, we are recommending that the county proceed with a modified version of the model code. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why we believe that it needs to be modified. The reason we think the model code is a better option than the site-by-site habitat assessment, there are several. So first, we believe that actually putting code language into the zoning code provides a clearer roadmap for applicants to follow and for staff to implement, rather than some sort of site-by-site assessment that might differ from one site to another. I think that increases complexity. The second reason is because we do think that applicants will need consultant services no matter which option we choose. But we think that the consultant service requirement will be higher, the burden will be higher with the site-by-site assessment than following the model code. So that's another reason why we think that's a better option. The third one is that if we were to do the site-by-site habitat assessment, we think that the county would be best advised to hire a third-party reviewer, because the study comes in and you're asking a non-scientist, a planner who is not a biologist, to look at that study and determine if it's professionally sound or not, and we think that provides, potentially some risk for the county. So then we're into having to have a contract and hire a consultant, and that ultimately increases our cost and then is potentially passed on, of course, to the applicants through fees. So it just seems more complex. And then the other, really at the end of the day, what FEMA basically got to in these sessions is that they really think these two options are going to end up getting applicants in the same place at the end. So it's really not clear that there's a big benefit to doing the site-by-site assessment. I will say that FEMA's guidance has honestly just sort of been changing. It's kind of been this rollout of, well, now we've learned this, we're going to tell you something slightly different. So I think maybe in the beginning it seemed like these two options might be substantially different, and now we're thinking at the end of the day in terms of what type of development people are going to be allowed to do, there's probably not a lot of difference, and so we want to go with the simplest approach for applicants and for the county. I mentioned that what we're recommending is a modified version of the model code, and that's because some of you have heard this before, and moving forward into the next year or so, you're going to hear this more, which is that there are requirements in state law that regulations for housing in rural areas, rural residential areas, and in the urban area have to be what's called clear and objective. That's a pretty high bar when you're trying to write regulations about complex things. The model code that FEMA has produced is not clear and objective. They argue that for federal purposes, they believe it is, but it seems to be the consensus of our council, planners, other jurisdictions that we're hearing from, that it is not clear and objective under how that's been interpreted in the state of Oregon. So we need to modify the model code to make it clear and objective. FEMA has indicated they are willing to accept modifications to their model, provided that it still maintains what's called no net loss of certain floodplain functions, which is kind of a scientific concept that that National Marine Fisheries expressed in their biological opinion that got us here. So we are going to have to make changes to the model code to make it clear and objective, and I'm not going to pretend that that's going to be easy. I think there are going to be some complexities to that, but that seems to be the only way to kind of thread the needle between FEMA's requirements and state law. And that's what we're trying to figure out. So we've given you three options. I know there's going to be questions, it's a lot, but the three options are that you would initiate amendments to the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan and Zoning and Development Ordinance to implement FEMA's model code for achieving no net loss of 3 floodplain functions for development in the special flood hazard area, including modifications necessary to ensure that the code as applied to housing is clear and objective. Number 2, initiate amendments to the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan and Zoning and Development Ordinance to implement the site-by-site habitat assessment, PICM, pre-implementation compliance measure option. Or 3, direct staff to do no further work at this time. Staff recommends option 1.
So just briefly, just so you understand the nuance around we do have a lot of floodplains in Clackamas County, urban area, rural area, et cetera. I think I shared this number with you previously. FEMA informed us they have approximately 900, I think, policies for different improvements in that area through this National Flood Insurance Program. That coverage within those policies was somewhere north of $290 million worth of improvements. Having said that, that's a lot, but on average, just so you understand, we generally get about 30 or less floodplain development permits a year. And so what we're talking about the reason I'm sharing this with you, there's some during that interim period between December and May, when we get this adopted, I mean, we're really probably going to be having a discussion with those folks who want to develop to say, hey, you might just want to put a pause on this until we get this adopted. That would be an easier path forward for you, rather than trying, I'm not sure if you've ever tried to go on the National Marine Fisheries website or any of those federal websites and try to get direction. It's very complicated. So just, again, scope and scale of development we're talking about on a yearly basis. We'd happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yes, I have several. Did this policy come out of FEMA or did it come out of Congress? Do you know?
It came from a lawsuit against FEMA. So Congress was not directly involved in this
Who
directive.
were the parties to the lawsuit?
So it's certain environmental groups. I don't know for sure. I think Portland Audubon Society was one of them. They're called something else now, but I believe back in 2016, they
What
were
year?
a party. It was 2016 that the lawsuit was filed.
I'm writing this down. Is this for new development only, you said?
New development, but it would include modifications to stuff that's already out there, but it's not retroactive to what's already there.
You say it's not retroactive, but it could apply to existing structures, homes and businesses.
If they want to add on or do additional development, yes, absolutely.
So it is retroactive, and that is really going to have an effect on our businesses. And I know of such a situation in Washington State where this is really horrific, affecting some businesses. There is water everywhere in the Pacific Northwest. You're not going to, I live on a hill. I'm surprised this doesn't come after me. It rains and we have flooding because that's Oregon. You ever drive the freeway last night coming home? I mean, we get deluged and it is flooding. And this is a horrific land grab. This is a horrific taking away your rights, folks, policy. I'm not saying that to you. I'm saying it to anybody who's listening out there. What's the cost to Clackamas County to do this? You say it's in your work plan, but you may not know the actual cost. You say it's in the budget. I don't know how you could have budgeted for this in the last budget cycle.
It's in the budget only because we anticipate doing it with existing staffing. But what that really means is that I'm sitting here instead of doing something else, right? Or I and my staff are working on the code amendments instead of doing something else.
Well, yeah, and
So
what's
something
falling by
waits.
the wayside? So you should have another staff member to do this. You really should. Whether you're going to get it or not, that's not up to me. So you said you're going to have to hire an outside consultant to do some of this work. And then you say some of the applicants could possibly hire an outside consultant to be in compliance with a national code that nobody understands and doesn't know how to do.
I think that's a good summation. We
Okay.
would anticipate that with the model code, we won't need to hire outside consultant. If we went with the site by site, which is not our recommendation, we think we would. But I think applicants are going to need to hire somebody. And I think, yes, there's technical questions we don't have the answers to at this point.
Yeah, and I thank you for trying to do this. I understand why you want to do the model code, but here's the rub, in that it applies to everyone, and maybe it should not apply to everyone, because for the little I know about this and what we've been told, we set a standard. It's the same standard for every piece of property. When one property may be more prone to flooding than the other, and so the one on the others, where they have just a little bit, but yet they have to go over the top to make the mitigation proper. So I'm uncertain on adopting a model code versus site by site, but I understand why you're putting that forward. I really am. This is too bad. I think maybe I need to call President Trump and say, Mr. President, you want to do away with some regulations that are hurting people, taking away their private property rights and hurting businesses. I got a model one out here in Oregon for you. So I'll be passing that on, just letting you folks know. This is awful. This is really awful. And you're telling me 16 species that are listed by the National Marine Fisheries Services. Are there species that we have heard of before? Do you have a list?
Salmon and steelhead, but I couldn't list all the different
There's probably
varieties.
some
That's what
toads
we're
and
talking about.
pollywogs and
Anadromous fish.
Salamanders, thank you, frogs, yeah. Some mutated species of a salamander or a toad that has popped up, because I'm very familiar with this, because this is how I got my start in politics in 1988 on endangered species, and it's only gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. Mark, you're up.
Thank you. Good morning. First question that comes to mind is that, do we have any legal recourse to resist this regulation?
So I don't want to overstep, and if council wants to step in, I'm happy to have that happen. All I can really tell you is that there is talk of a lawsuit. I haven't actually heard whether anything was filed. The December 1st deadline was maybe going to be a trigger for a lawsuit to be filed. There is a group called Oregonians for Floodplain Protection. Tillamook County is really taking the lead on that, but there are other people, other organizations, local governments, potentially other interested groups that may be filing a lawsuit. I don't know if anything's happened. I think that some of you are probably familiar with David Honeycutt's group, Oregon Property Owners Association. They were circulating a letter with some legal concerns at the AOC conference last month. I don't know whether they may file a lawsuit or not, but there's definitely been some talk. As of yet, the county hasn't moved in any direction like that.
Okay. If the board were to accept option 1, would that have any negative effect on property values of existing development in these areas affected by this measure?
I mean, I don't think I am probably qualified to comment on whether there would be a value change. I mean, it is a layer of regulation people don't currently have. And so if you have a home, for example, that maybe somebody could buy riverfront property that's in a floodplain and demo the house that's been there since, and build something newer, or they've got a house they want to add on. Right now, you can do that with, in many cases, with really just meeting some certain construction standards for the home, which are technically feasible for people to meet. This does open up these mitigation requirements if you're going to do that, where you're looking at having to potentially, if you can't do mitigation on your own site, find some kind of off-site mitigation location, which is going to be challenging. Where is somebody going to let you plant trees or let you, build or excavate in the floodplain to compensate for the house that you're building, because that's really what we're talking about. So
Okay.
I would think that for certain properties, there could be a potential loss of value. I don't
Okay.
know that that's the case everywhere.
Okay. So we have billions, maybe, of existing homes in floodplain areas, Lake Oswego, Milwaukee, homes along the Sandy from Welch's all the way down to Sandy, the Clackamas, Molalla. And so if somebody has a piece of property in one of those areas and they're getting ready to build their dream home, they haven't come to you for a permit yet, if this is implemented, they have to go to the federal fisheries for a permit from them before they can come to the county and apply for a permit to build on their property?
So yes, I mean, the sequence would be, first of all, only in that interim period. So only until we implement our regulations. From now until May, there would be, they would come to us first. They would make their proposal about how they were going to meet the floodplain requirements, the current floodplain requirements, which is about structural things, basically. And we would say, okay, you're approved, and as a condition, you need to go to this federal agency and either get them to give you a permit or to tell you you don't need one. As Dan was saying, I think that is going to be complex for people to do. And so in all likelihood, in this interim period, we will be talking to applicants about how they might want to wait and file their application in June instead of in January, for example.
Okay. And then one last question. For you to write the modification to the model code verbiage, how long will that take? And how long is FEMA giving you to respond?
So FEMA is really not technically giving us any time to respond. I mean, they have said the deadline's December 1st.
Okay.
What they have said That's their official position. And they've said that we are subject to the site-by-site assessment immediately. We don't believe we can legally implement that because we have to amend our code. We can't just tell people they have to comply with regulations we don't have. That's our legal position. That is the position of some other local governments as well. Washington County has said that. Tillamook County was getting ready to say that. I haven't seen their final letter. So there's been a lot of pushback. FEMA has informally indicated if it's clear that we're working towards something, and we've been responsive and been engaged in the process, that they're not going to seek enforcement against the county. They would be looking to really work more with jurisdictions that have been non-responsive. But there's no promises, so I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
With the caveat that we're liable, though.
Oh, I
with
mean,
the caveat,
sure.
Their perception is the fact that we would then be liable if there was an impact.
Right.
And so that's why you see the strategy between now and when the adoption date it takes place is to add that condition because it reduces the county's liability.
Correct.
So.
Okay, so
Yes.
finally, if there's no coordinated statewide legal effort to resist this mandate, then I would recommend option one.
Thank you. Is the model plan set up so that the county does the permit to the national fisheries for the applicant?
We wouldn't need to do that if
Okay,
we
that goes
adopt the
away. I'm wanting
rules.
to understand. Got it.
Correct. That
Okay.
would be just out. We would just meet these standards and apply those to development.
Okay, and so
Yes.
the site-by-site plan would be more cumbersome because the applicant would have to go to the National Marine Fisheries.
No.
A lot of consultant work with the site-by-site, a lot of, on both sides of the ledger, which increase costs for our citizens that are trying to do development and the county as well. So.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, well, jokingly, I just kind of almost wonder if we need to have a special budget session or another department for processing all these unfunded mandates and to comply with all these ever-changing regulations. It seems like it's an animal all of itself, and whether it affects your department or another it's just a little bit maddening. So that said, I just kind of want to step back high level and I guess justify this in my own sense, put it in terms. So I think Commissioner Scholl was talking about the question about valuation, would or not affect it, and then he also, the aspect of whether or not this is retroactive in the context of compliance, right? So I understand what you mean by that. So my bigger question is that I'm reading this sentence in the executive summary here, and it says, non-compliance could put at risk the county's NFIP certification, which carries significant consequences. So, and I think that probably leads into what you said as far as enforcement and liability. So explain that a little bit. What is the county's, would that affect or potentially lead to a private insurance company saying, we're not going to cover you because you're not in compliance? Is it that? What is that? What does that really mean to us?
Oh, well, we can both do it. So probably this statement should be stronger. I think it will put our NFIP participation at risk. I suppose there's always this question, they have to go through a process, right? And we would presumably protest and, try to challenge it and all of that. But in the end, I think they could potentially remove us. There's a question about this because it came from a lawsuit rather than they haven't changed the federal law regarding this. So that's part of where there's some gray area here. It's like, can FEMA make local governments do this or can't they? And they have one position and there may be some legal arguments that they can't make us do this. And that's maybe part of this lawsuit potential. But the consequences of being removed from the NFIP, they fall within those floodplain areas. So it's not like the whole county, right? It's anything that's in a special flood hazard area. You can't get federal flood insurance. Well, I guess even if somebody wanted to buy it out of a floodplain, there would be no availability of federal flood insurance from the federal government. A private insurer potentially might still give people floodplain insurance. It's my understanding the private insurance market has gotten better for floodplain, but I still don't know how good it is or how it compares to being able to get a federal policy. So no federal policies. They would not renew existing federal policies. You would not be able to get a federally backed mortgage. So where the federal agencies are backing the mortgage, those wouldn't be available. And there would be no disaster relief for consequences of flooding in those areas from the federal government. So it's pretty significant.
Okay, so let me reword this a little bit differently. Thank you for that. That helps, because I wasn't saying is it could or would. You're saying it's more like would.
More like would, yeah.
And the other one, going back to the retroactive status, so just because we do this or we don't do this, if you have an existing home today in a floodplain and we're not certified, and so they're not potentially eligible for federal insurance, they're still impacted, whether they're, right?
Correct. They're impacted if we don't comply.
Right.
If we do comply, their house can still sit there and there's no requirements that come until they want to do new development.
Right, and
Yes.
I recall this process, I just wanted to reaffirm why we're doing this,
Yes.
right? So this is not just for new development, this is for the welfare, the insurance, and if there's a disaster, national disaster, they don't have to, they won't come in and rescue us because we're not NFIP certified.
Yep.
So I understand this, okay, so I want to just confirm my understanding, so let me just check off everything I had here. Let's go back, Dan, expand on enforcement. You said enforcement. Is that the enforcement of the FEMA to enforce us to do this? I was just trying to understand the word enforcement and then liability. Those came in the same conversation.
So the liability, the liability that we measure in the enforcement action that we're talking about is essentially if we don't take any action and articulate to FEMA what our intent is, what they have said is that we are liable for any development that occurs from December 1st going forward until we adopt that code to ensure that it has no net loss. No net loss. And essentially, we're achieving that objective and trying to minimize our liability by adding that condition that we talked about you've got to go to to NIMS and talk to them and have them affirm the fact that you have no net loss or approve something. We don't know what that is. And that's about the easiest way we could find to kind of land the plane during this interim process. Again, we're going to have detailed discussions with our applicants to say, it might be in your best interest to just hold off a little bit until we get these codes adopted, because it will be clearer, clear and objective standards that they know exactly what they need to do, where and when. And that's the concern.
Yeah. So this is more of a narrative, but I just wanted to just say that at a very early age in air quality, I got involved with a lot of because California was the leading in air quality. They were like leading the charge, and all the experts were in the state of California and trying to lead the charge into meeting federal regulations for air quality. So I, was kind of involved at an early age, and realizing these things are coming from the top down and sometimes are misguided and there's errors. And then in my public part, on the water side, we would have all these things handed down and changes of regulation. And then you're also, then the whole country is looking at, oh, we need to hire people to help us guide us through that. And there's not enough of those people out there, right? So they're going to be overwhelmed. And sometimes that leads to either, an extensions, or it leads to maybe a lawsuit and everywhere else because it's not practical to do this. So I just don't know how many industry experts on there. If they're in high demand and someone wants to develop, like Commissioner Scholl's example, they want to develop their dream home, and they can't find the expert to process this as we go forward, whether or not we go forward or not. The price goes up, right? So it just puts a demand on that expertise that's, few and far between. And I don't think they're cognizant in the real life how the real world will adjust to all these things, that we don't have the capacity. So I just wanted those are just more of a narrative. I don't disagree. I think it's an easy choice here to move for option one.
Any further comments from commissioners on this? Do you have anything else you want to add, staff?
Not at this time.
Commissioner Scholl?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I'm curious about how AOC feels about this. Would it be a good idea for Clackamas County to present this to AOC for discussion, to see if there's a statewide appetite for resisting this by some legal means?
Well, that could be an option separate from this.
I just want to highlight the fact that we have been working hand in hand with county council and their staff, and also our PGA representation, to have a
Okay.
broader discussion around the region as a whole.
Okay.
To see how, and there have been letters that have come out of these congressional delegations that have gone forward to FEMA. A couple things. One saying the complexity around it, because our land use process is different and it takes time to get this done. So the deadline was a little bit unreasonable. And they asked for extensions on that or changes. I mean, I guess I want to take your brain back to the fact it's called these pre-implementation options that are here. So this is all a discussion around the fact that we know that the floodplain requirements are probably going to change around 2027. I think that was the expected deadline for that significant change. That's been fast-tracked with this new lawsuit, and that's why we had this interim dialogue going on, and it's messy,
Okay.
and there's just not a lot of clarity to it. So.
Okay.
All righty.
Well, Chair, I'm ready to make a motion if you like.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Find it here. I move to initiate amendments to the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Development Ordinance to implement FEMA's model code for achieving no net loss of 3 floodplain functions for development in the special flood hazard area, including modifications necessary to ensure the code as applied to housing is clear and objective.
Seconded.
Commissioner Savas has moved that we adopt option 1 for the National Floodplain Insurance Potential Compliance Measures, and Commissioner Scholl has seconded the motion. Any further discussions? Seeing none, would the clerk please take the poll?
Commissioner Scholl.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Madam Chair.
Aye. Motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And please continue work on this and keep the board apprised of the ongoings statewide. All righty. Nancy, what's next?
All right, thank you. So up next, we have the Supported Housing Services Spending Update. And the presenters today are Rod Cook, who is the Director of Health, Housing, and Human Services, and Adam Brown, who is the Deputy Director. And Rod, I will turn it over to you.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
You guys ready for us?
Yeah, go ahead, please. Thank you.
We are here this morning seeking your approval of recommended updates to the plan for one-time and limited-term uses of our supportive housing services carryover balance. The carryover balance is the one-time funds that have accumulated as we've built our new recovery-oriented homeless services system. Adam Brown, our Deputy Director, has been working intimately with this. I'm going to pass the mic to Adam.
Welcome, Adam.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Smith, Commissioners. Adam Brown, Deputy Director, Health, Housing, and Human Services. So we're now in the 4th year of supportive housing services measure funding, and our homeless services system is in a period of transition. The first 3 years were focused on designing and implementing a balanced, recovery-oriented system that supports the journey from homelessness and housing instability to permanent, stable housing. Modest investments have been made in front-end programs like outreach and shelter, balanced by more substantial commitments in permanent housing opportunities, including permanent supportive housing, to maintain our focus on ending chronic homelessness. With the new system largely built, Clackamas County is in a new developmental phase. As we enter this new phase, we are focusing on evaluating the effectiveness of our programs and refining our investments to ensure we're making the most of our SHS funding. And this work comes at a very critical time as we're responding to reduced funding forecast and potential changes by Metro that may further decrease our program funds. Our goal remains to sustain a balanced system and strengthen our efforts despite these challenges. For these reasons, the updates we are proposing to the carryover plan seek to rebalance and affirm commitments made since the last update and make additional limited-term investments in programs that will help Clackamas County transition to a lower level of system capacity without adversely impacting very vulnerable households. In June of 2023, you approved of a plan for one-time and limited-term uses of the anticipated carryover balance of SHS funds going into fiscal year 23-24. Investments were made across 5 priority areas, and staff committed to returning to you on an as-needed basis to update the plan. A few months later, in September, after receiving more revenue than expected to close out the fiscal year, we held a second policy session to add more funds to the carryover plan. All told, you approved over $75 million in strategic investments in financial stability to capitalize our contingency reserves and protect us against volatility in the revenue, expanding our system capacity with limited-term investments to develop our system and provide technical assistance and grow our community-based providers, upstream investments in limited-term pilot programs to close system gaps, address unmet needs, and test innovative system integrations. There was funding for short-term rent assistance to continue the expanded funding that we had during the COVID-19 pandemic. And you set aside capital needs funding for one-time capital investments in the infrastructure that we have long needed to deliver these services. As of last September, just under $17 million remained available for allocation. Today, we are recommending a series of updates to the carryover plan based on your priorities, project updates, the availability of an additional $9 million of one-time funds carried over from last year, and changes to our SHS revenue picture. We have just under $26 million available for allocation and another $4.75 million available from reallocation from prior investments, including like the stabilization center, for example, where we had set aside $3.5 million and then got $4 million from the state for that project, so that money comes back onto the table. From here, I'm going to break the proposed updates into two basic categories. There are things that kind of affirm commitments that the board has already discussed, particularly around the recovery-oriented system of care. And then there are a couple of new modest investments that are one-time investments in our system infrastructure. And I'm going to separate that from a discussion about the funding that we're going to propose to set aside for maintaining system stability as we transition to this new revenue picture and potential changes by Metro to the funding that we have available. So starting with the things that are less connected to that changing revenue picture, we're proposing to add $10.25 million to the recovery-oriented infrastructure bucket. The prior allocation for recovery-oriented infrastructure in our capital needs category was $10.25 million. This allocation was made in September of last year prior to specific commitments for the Recovery Center and the disposition of the Housing Authority's scattered sites to support recovery-oriented programming. So we're proposing to double the initial allocation, bringing the total to $20.5 million to allow for $10 million in funding for the Recovery Center and $10.5 million for the scattered site disposition. This has been discussed already by this board to this point. We've had the updates on scattered sites. We know we're full steam ahead on the Recovery Center. This is kind of an affirmation of assumptions we've made to this point about the availability of funds to support those two things. The next piece is a couple of additions to our city-led initiatives campaign. So the city of Milwaukee has requested one-time funds for site improvements at a church in Milwaukee that would enable the church to offer severe weather shelter as well as limited-term funding for operations of that shelter. The investment here proposes $55,000 for site improvements at the church and $300,000 for 3 years of funding for severe weather shelter. This request came in after our initial round of proposals. We discussed it at that time, and they were still working with the church on what this would look like. So we're proposing this investment. We think that having community infrastructure scattered throughout Clackamas County that we can ramp up in the event of an emergency is a sensible use of resources. And so we would propose that we move that forward. The second addition to city-led initiatives is for the Tualatin Food Pantry. And the city of Tualatin is requesting funding for the food pantry to make infrastructure upgrades to its existing pantry space, including installing a new HVAC system to provide climate control to better preserve food and regulate the temperature for clients and volunteers, also make repairs to its walk-in cooler, and freezer unit. So similarly, this request came in after our initial round. The city of Tualatin didn't submit anything for our first round, and we started talking with them about this in April of last year. They were pursuing some federal funding that fell through on this, and so now they're coming to us asking for some support. The third piece, before we kind of take a break and talk about these considerations, is we're proposing to set aside $2 million for capital improvements at the Veterans Village. And this really is to extend the useful life of that site. That site was built in a time when Clackamas County had much less resources for a capital investment like this. There are currently 30 pods at the village, but only 24 are being used to house program participants because of limitations with the kitchen and bathroom units. Additionally, some of the pods need upgrades, common facilities are nearing the end of their useful life, and gravel pathways and the parking lot need to be replaced with hard surfaces. Making these improvements will extend the site's life and allow us to use all 30 pods at that site. It will also help us address the disparity with the new site that we're building next door. So I'm going to stop there and answer questions about these pieces before we move on to a conversation about the new SHS funding picture.
Yes, I'm sure we all have questions about this, and looky there, the light board lit up. Commissioner Savas, you're first.
Yeah, so let's take the last one first, and that is the Vets Village. So what maybe my understanding was different, but we designed that for 30, and then we started out with 15, and then we added some, and as I understand, we felt we may not really need to ever add the 30 because we're probably, as we're making headway with homeless veterans, that number is, population is dropping, we're being effective. So I'm just asking from a practical standpoint, is there a capacity issue actually for the needs for we're turning away veterans? Understanding that's different than, just nuancing this, than the capacity at the site, which I think you're speaking to. So is it both? Or is something changed now where the homeless veterans are actually growing in population? I thought we were making pretty good advances. So can you help me out with that one? I have more, but that's one.
Yeah, and that's a super good question that I wish I would have anticipated so I could say more definitively. I do not think that this is an issue related to homeless veterans specifically and the need for additional capacity. You're right, we've made really, really good headway on that. I think it's more the system capacity generally that we could benefit from having full use of that site for shelter options.
Yeah, and you speak to all the other amenities that need to be increased in order to get to 30, but there again, if it turns out that sweet spot or the actual spot of actually, getting maximum utilization with the population that's out there, which is ideally diminishing,
Yep.
it would be almost foolish to increase the capacity if you knowing your population is decreasing, right? So that's my point. Sure. So to take that point, and I'm going to get to my really greater question, that is that if I'm not mistaken, there was a need to appropriate these funds. There was a strategy of appropriating the funds we had for risk of, I forgot exactly what that nuance was at the time, why we wanted to appropriate every dollar. But, we did so, and that year did so by direction. Things have changed a little bit now with the conversations we're currently subject to. I don't feel we're genuinely involved like we should be, but we're subject to. And I'm really wondering if there was a reduction in the amount of dollars that we are going to receive, whether it is done for the fact that the collections are down because employment's down or whatever that is, and also if there's a cut at the metro level for a measure that would reduce that. So I guess is that where is our flexibility and using the resources as efficiently as possible to maximize everything we have? And is there reserves essentially if we need to So I guess my question is, have we gone through all of those with the mindset is, hey, we need to either cut this or scale it back? I don't think it's responsible to keep on going forward. That may not be a good use of the funds. And then we're left holding the bag. I know that's a reality that we could face, and that's not anyone's fault. But how do we take these extra funds and maximize them to something that we know we can support in the event that funding is reduced to operate them?
Yeah, super good question, and I'll tell you that this is something that I've been worried about since the first day of designing SHS programs, was the volatility of the revenue source that we knew, and also the uncertainty around the size of a tax base when you're implementing a new tax. And rather than, I'm a technocrat, kind of a boring guy, right? I want to plan thoughtfully and be conservative in how we plan and not subject ourselves to unnecessary risk. Unfortunately, here with the SHS funds, the failure to set realistic community expectations about what it would look like to ramp up these programs and kind of insulate ourselves from that criticism of accumulating a carryover balance, our inability to fend that off and set those expectations now has subjected us to the risk of a changing revenue picture. So you're right that Clackamas County took an approach in year one of budgeting in the year following collections, and that essentially would have bought Clackamas County 12 months of downside risk in the revenue picture. The criticism was we weren't allocating the funds, we weren't spending quickly enough, get it together and build these programs. Well, now we're seeing the consequences of not managing that risk appropriately. One of the ways we tried to manage it in Clackamas County was by setting aside appropriate contingencies and reserves, which you all approved as part of the initial spend down plan. The IGA says that we need to have no more than 5% contingency set aside and a minimum of 10% of stabilization reserves. When I looked at the kind of risk to our system, my opinion was 10% stabilization reserves wasn't enough. So we brought forward a recommendation to all of you to set aside 20. And that's what we have today is $14.7 million set aside in stabilization reserves and $3.6 million set aside in contingency. So in addition to everything that we're talking about here today, we still have that, almost $20 million set aside to protect against the volatility in the revenue source. And I'll just close on this. Earlier this week, we were talking with Metro about what are we going to do about the current forecast in terms of managing the impact to our programs. And Metro raised that, counties do have the options of tapping their stabilization reserves now. And my reaction to that was absolutely not. And I'll talk about this more in our next section when we talk about the revenue forecast, but it isn't the product of one-time volatility. This is a rebasing of the tax base itself. Stabilization reserves are for limited term impacts. This is a perpetual impact to the size of the tax base. I am not going to recommend that Clackamas County tap its stabilization reserves for this. We need to adjust the size of our system on an ongoing basis. So that's my thinking.
Yeah, so I'll close with this as an idea, and I'm really talking to my colleagues on this one. Appreciate it, and I also know that, I can communicate on the math level and say, what those reserves were scaled to was based on a revenue stream at the time, and if the revenue stream on the last one is any indication, we would probably rescale what those reserves might look like, and it might be a smaller number if it's percentage-wise, which is unfortunate, right? So I guess we have to either average that out or realize that if that's the policy and it's at 20%, and so anyhow, you know where I'm going with that.
Yep.
But
And I've been thinking about that, Commissioner. So, our you're right. The 20% is pegged to the anticipated revenue amount.
Right.
Since our revenue amount is going from 74 million to 63 million, in essence, we actually have $2 million on the table that we can use to manage the impacts without having to quote-unquote tap the reserves at the 20% level. If that
And I
makes
would
sense.
also argue it's premature to make that assumption until we see another 2 cycles of what that revenue stream really looks like. So we don't separate anomaly from what might be an actual revenue flow.
Sure.
So what I would like to see, again, I'm not, I don't know what my colleagues think, what I'd like to see is that all these really programs on a spreadsheet and say, okay, what can we maintain, what's at risk, what's practical, and whether they're color-coded or whatnot, and grade them as to, in a means to at least prepare us for a ramp down.
Yep.
Okay, and it's a sad state of affairs. But if we did do that, I would like to know what your recommendations are for whether it's this one-time capital money or is even frankly the operational aspect. Where can we ramp down, right? And that'll be a painful discussion, but in a sense, if that informs us, that's maybe we want to move money around to some of these things and actually take a little bit here and add a little bit there. I think I just don't have enough right now with all these unknowns.
Yeah, and in the next sort of section of the dialogue here, maybe I should have done these the other way around. I'm going to speak a little bit to that. And I was in a 2-hour kind of deep work session with our team yesterday working on exactly that. So.
Okay, we have a lot of questions here, so if you could be brief in your answers, Adam. I appreciate your vast knowledge, but, okay, who's next? Commissioner West.
So this is really there's a lot of moving parts, isn't it? It's super complicated. And there's a lot of things in the presentation, at least this initial part, that aren't being taken really into account, I feel like, because I'm sure we'll get there. But as the public knows, Chair Smith and I were at Metro all afternoon yesterday dealing with the conversation around a reduction in the overall rate, but it's actually a tax increase because they want to extend this for an additional 20 years. And there's a lot of contention between the counties and Metro right now. So it's hard, Commissioner's Officer, right, it is hard to understand the picture right now because we're fighting for one thing in Clackamas for the system that we created and the expectations that we set forth. And we were vindicated in how we rolled out these fundings that first year, even though we got a lot of criticism from Here Together and others regarding how we decided to be more cautious. The projections have been all over the place and never consistent. So when they say we're going to project this, I'm like, well, are we playing poker today? Like, are we just at the casino? Like, it seems like they have no idea. Actually, the projections are often very off. So I don't have a lot of faith in like how to plan. It's been very difficult to plan for these types of things because of all of these situations that we're dealing with. Couple things that has come up, had a quick but productive conversation with a number of electeds in the metro area yesterday. One of them was Mayor-elect for Portland, Keith Wilson. There seems to be kind of a new, you probably know where I'm going with this, but there seems to be a renewed push a little bit for when people need to get off the streets immediately, they can get off the streets for some, but a more of a lower barrier shelter capacity. I know we've talked about that. I think Milwaukee Severe Weather Shelter provides a little bit of that maybe. So I'm open to that for the city of Milwaukee. I want to know your thoughts if you think we have some type of gap, like our borders are porous. As someone crosses over Duke Street on 82nd, they don't realize they just crossed over into Clackamas County. And if they need somewhere that night to go, period, to get off the streets, do we have a bed, right? Any kind of low barrier shelter facilities. It does seem to be part of the system for us that we have made, I think, intentionally different priorities in how we build out our system than what seems to be a circular process of shelter street, shelter street, shelter street. But is there somewhere goes sheltered then somewhere not the street? Like I kind of want to talk about the investments around there. And then Tualatin Food Pantry. It was very apparent to me yesterday, Chair, maybe you agree. There was a lot of lobbying by the cities. Mayor Joe Buck out of Lake Oswego was there, the mayor of Gresham, the mayor of Sherwood, mayor of Portland, Mayor-elect of Portland. Mayor Buck has been We have a great relationship with the county. We have no problems. We are ahead of the game with giving these city-led initiatives, and they're working for us. And we found a pathway while y'all are just talking about this now. Some of the counties or electeds, I will not say any names, tend to be somewhat get out of my sandbox type of mentality, not that same collaborative approach with their cities, or we don't have enough to share with you, so what are you going to give up type of mentality. Just a totally different process than what we've had in Clackamas, to be honest. Am I right in my assumptions there? And some of it got a little passive aggressive at the table at times. And I was like, wow, this is not, we have our issues in Clackamas, but this doesn't seem to be one of them. So Tualatin, though, isn't in our county really.
I double checked.
I mean,
This
it kind
site
of, it is
in
when you go
our
to
county,
65th and you look
yes.
at Meridian Park, and then you have the suburban neighborhood behind it, and that kind of more rural, like Staffordy kind of area, yes. But the bulk of Tualatin is in Washington County. Now, Washington County might have some tension with their cities, but we also have limited resources that the Clackamas County residents want primarily spent in Clackamas County. I have a hard time understanding a food pantry allocation when we're talking about maybe low-barrier shelters, extreme weather. We have more tailored things moving forward, and how are we going to fund these things with the volatility or a rate reduction? Maybe Tualatin have they approached Washington County? Has Washington County been a good partner to them? Is Washington County going to pick up half this bill or 3/4 of it, since it's primarily in Washington County? We have limited resources, and now we're going to go maybe into a sense of scarcity, and because of changes that this board doesn't agree with that are looming around the corner. But so my thoughts around like that piece of of our system around sheltering and getting this both care, and the Tualatin food pantry piece here. What are your thoughts on them?
So with regard to shelter, we've made some investments over the last couple of years. We got our stabilization center coming online that has 12 beds, right? We got Clackamas Village coming online. We're building out other infrastructure in the recovery system of care. I really want to resist the compulsion to spend more money on shelter. We want to end people's homelessness. We have been really successful in having the balanced system where we've got enough shelter to get people off the streets, but that is a conduit to a permanent housing solution. And so there's a risk of overinvestment in shelter. You have to pull from the other side of the system, and then it isn't a permanent destination. So that's been our staff recommendation. And so we have moved forward some modest investments in shelter, recognizing that we do need some of that in our system. But I think Multnomah County is going to be in a tough place here over the next couple of years, because they have really huge investments in shelter, and it's limited. That at some point they're going to reach an X where their effort to place people into permanent housing to meet their SHS goal is going to butt up against the amount that they're spending on shelter. So they won't be able to afford both. Now, ideally, you would start ramping down your shelter system as you're placing more people into permanent housing, but
That hasn't happened.
No.
Or nowhere close to it. So is there an effort, you think, by Portland and the larger cities to have us augment or supplement shelter space in our county because they're having difficulties, or is this a different philosophy?
No, we haven't had those conversations at the staff level. We have had the conversations about the financial challenge, though, and what's going to happen over the next couple of years, and how do we, as a community, sort of support that transition. And ideally, you wouldn't need thousands of beds of shelter that you're sustaining that really cost as much on a per bed basis as permanent housing for people. So I think that's a structural challenge. And just quickly on the food pantry thing, I haven't talked to Washington County about bearing some of these costs. We funded food pantry investments in Gladstone, Lake Oswego, and others. This site is in Clackamas County. So I haven't had that conversation about sharing the cost. They broached us. We're trying to be good partners.
Where
in
is it
supporting.
exactly? Where's this? Is it a church or no? Where is this?
It does share. It shares. They lease the space from a church.
Okay.
I'll get you the address.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that it?
For now.
Yeah, I have comments to make too. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, so on the, I know that many of our nonprofits that provide food to the needy, provide it to anyone from anywhere, doesn't matter. But it would be interesting to see what percent of the Tualatin Food Pantry efforts are provided to people of Clackamas County. The other thing is on the recovery-oriented infrastructure, you've got $20.5 million in there, and you've got $10 million for the recovery center, which we're working on, Addiction Recovery Center,
Yes.
and $10.5 million for scattered sites. I'd be interested to know, I think Commissioner Savas mentioned this, what exactly are those scattered sites and what kind of priority do they have? My concern is that there is of course, all of our efforts are pressing needs, but the development, construction of the Addiction Recovery Center is, in my mind, maybe our most pressing need, okay, to fill a very critical void that we have in this system of care that we want to put together. So my question is, of the $10.5 million for scattered sites, should some of that be moved over to the pot of money for the recovery center? And finally, how much money total is set aside to expedite the design and construction of the Addiction Recovery Center, the portion, of course, there's going to be a campus, but the portion dealing with the beds for addiction recovery specifically?
Super good question. To the first one about scattered sites, what we had proposed is that those scattered sites are intended to be complementary to the recovery campus by providing recovery transitional housing options. So it was taking our housing authority scattered sites, passing them to community-based organizations and repurposing them for things like recovery transitional housing, medical respite housing, and other housing needs that will complement the services on site at the recovery campus. So they go together because we do need recovery transitional housing.
Okay.
And we've talked with some of the same service providers about this part of the plan. And we have a request for expressions of interest out right now to acquire those sites for use in exactly what I just described. So I think they go together.
Yeah, and so one of the key things, because now we're getting HAC involved, so it's housing to housing. That has to be foundational in this, as we get rid of these properties and transition them into, it has to be housing to housing. You can't just eliminate them. So that's why that's a key piece to this.
Okay, and I have
for drug
one
and
more
alcohol.
question, just to make sure I'm clear on this. On the updates to the carryover plan, right, that you propose for now, total available allocation, $25,950,000. Now, is that a reserve amount, or is that spent or earmarked on page 1, 2, 3, 4, on page 5? Top of page 5?
Yep. Top of page 5.
So that
shows-
$25,950,000 is earmarked here?
Yes.
Okay.
It's shown here. And there, I do want to get on to kind of the next portion at some point, the transition plan for SHS, because I think some of the questions here will be explained in that section. And the biggest single chunk, $17.8 million, is for that transition. But I wanted to show the math in that table.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Regarding the Veterans Village, I've always had the philosophy that before we start something new, we need to take care of old. And the Veterans Village is getting a little long in the tooth. My last site visit out there has been a couple of years ago, and that main building it's very used, and it needs an upgrade, regardless of how many people are out there. And we've had great success with the Veterans Village. I would like to see the $2 million that is talked about here go for that, because we may see great success today. We don't know what the future holds for this particular population. And we could have, a ramp up in our need for this. And I've been talking to some folks serving on the VAC. The VAC is very active, and there is a need for services, and we just don't know at what point that some of these people who are currently housed could become unhoused and would need services or retraining or getting back on their feet again. So I personally would like to see that. Regarding the food pantry in Tualatin, I'm agnostic about that. Commissioner West may want to talk about that some more. I do like the Milwaukee Church. I think that should be funded in this too. And I believe, Adam, correct me if on this list that you have put forward today is something that we can continue on, even with the reduction in funding.
Correct.
Okay. Last night at our meeting, or yesterday afternoon, it went into tonight, what Commissioner West alluded to, the proposal from the counties came back at considerably higher. I believe Metro wanted to go down to 250, even to 235. We said no. We wanted it 330. And so there was quite the discussion on that. Well, how did you get to that and that? Also, there is discussion about Metro's reserves they hold back. And even the governor said in a meeting earlier in the week, you're going to do something about that. You're not going to retain the high amount of reserves. You're going to put it out to the counties. So there is that. And folks, just know this probably will not come out until the end of January or February before they even have ballot language going forward. Because there's some things that can be done that doesn't need to be voted on. And the danger is if they make it too comprehensive in the ballot, people may not understand it. And there is the talk that if you extend this for another 20 years, that is indeed a tax increase, as I told the governor on Monday. She says, what do you mean? It's a tax reduction. Everybody wants a tax reduction. I says, yeah, it's in my DNA to reduce taxes. But if you have a tax that's designed for 10 years, you add an additional 20 years on it, over time, that is an increase. By the way, all taxes increase every year based on valuations, if it's value, or based on people's income. So there's a lot of unknowns about this, but I think that you've looked at the numbers enough to know, even in the worst case scenario, that these programs would go forward. Now, talking about the recovery center, let me get the numbers straight on this. We initially put 10 million, and then you have an additional how much?
It was 10.25
Yeah.
originally, another 10.25.
Okay, now that is in addition to additional what Cindy Becker presented, not additional, but she has monies in there. Do you remember that she has 5 or 6 different funding sources?
Yeah, and she has 10 million shown for SHS, and we've urged a little bit of caution on that one. We've said, hey, staff don't want to get ahead of the board decisions. We've been teeing up this update actually since May of this past year. And
Okay,
we
no,
had
Adam, don't go down the rabbit hole here.
Okay.
You're not understanding my question.
Sure.
Okay, 10.25 million SHS. And in this budget, do you have an additional 10 million?
Yes, but it's for 20 million in commitments total, 10 for the recovery campus and 10 for scattered site disposition.
Okay, so it's not for the recovery campus. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Got it.
Okay, thank you. Now, my issue with all these ongoing properties, what is the funding source for the Vets Village for ongoing operations and maintenance?
The Vets Village is funded by SHS.
Okay? Any other funding available coming for veterans, or is it? Now, wait a minute. That Vets Village campus was built before we had SHS, and what was your funding source then?
It was County General Fund, and that was, we have redirected
To
those
build it.
resources to urban.
I'm talking operations.
Yeah, operations. It was general fund.
Okay.
And we've redirected that as part of our rural area plan. So we backfilled with SHS and we redirected for rural.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really good on that. I think programs like the Vet Village and the Clackamas Village, I think those are just really important because when you look at the bang you're getting for the buck, I think it's pretty substantial. And those particular, I like those particular operations because they have a huge amount of independence to the people, yet accountability is really strong there. And that's why I think they can be so successful. And then you pick the people who need to go into those. I understand that. Commissioner Savas and then Commissioner West.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly speak to the Tualatin thing a little bit, and Commissioner West knows the area, I think, pretty well, but I just want to just highlight that, it sounds like this facility is in the Clackamas County portion of Tualatin, so I get that, and Tualatin has been great partners, but be mindful that it's that area that's partially in Clackamas is bordered by a lot of unincorporated area, a lot of geography. And I know that people that are houseless, right? So it's not about the number of homes there so much as the opportunity for a number of people to find a place in those areas. So that area is not insulated from, the folks that are in this county that are considered residents that are houseless. So therefore, just be mindful how much geography is there from Lake Oswego border all the way down the unincorporated portions of Lake Oswego, all the way through there. So I am sure that if we asked Washington County or Tualatin what they're receiving from the supportive housing funds, I'm sure they're getting something also in the Washington County portion. I'd love to know that, but I just want to just be an advocate for, it's not about where it's at as much the population being served there. And again, there's a lot of geography there where we know there's homeless folks.
In fact, we talked about that last night. The boundaries are porous.
Yeah.
What helps one area helps the other area too, because we're looking at a big pot of money. Yeah, Commissioner West.
Yeah, back to this issue. How far away is this location in Tualatin to the Wilsonville location over there on Broberg Road? They seem to only be maybe 3 to 4 miles apart from one another. And we gave a significant investment to Wilsonville's food pantry and their infrastructure, which regionally is supportive, to put another $250,000 to the Tualatin one at a church there. Why wouldn't we just tap the investment that we just increased the capacity of the Wilsonville one to maybe serve and help with both communities? It definitely is in Clackamas County. It's closer to it's not in this unincorporated kind of larger land. It's more in, I think, an urban setting, suburban urban setting than maybe this Tualatin one. Location-wise and knowing where we're putting resources throughout the county, to have two of the similar resources right next to each other, I think is a fair question to ask. In my opinion, if it is in Clackamas, then I think that's fair for us to look at, but there is real tension between Washington County right now and its city partners. That doesn't seem to exist in our county. Yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts, Adam?
Yeah, and we, for the Wilsonville investments, we did, invest in a few things there. We didn't give them money for the food pantry.
Okay.
It was other investments. But I have an idea here.
But they have a large food pantry attached to that same organization.
Okay.
It's a big warehousey food pantry right there on Broberg.
I've got another idea here. We've got some money accumulated for our regional strategies implementation fund. I might approach our Washington County partners and say, let's fund this with the dollars that are intended to meet regionally coordinated needs. This site is in Clackamas County. The bulk of the population of this community is in Washington County. What about that? That brings in another resource from SHS that isn't included here, and we have an accumulated balance. You know that 5% that was set aside for regional strategies. We've been struggling to find uses for those funds, so that could be a creative solution here.
Would you
Cool.
be willing to do that?
Yeah, yes, sure. I also just like the idea of having a more robust, centrally located, serves both communities in that side of the county. Just makes a lot more sense to me than having another little satellite location just a few miles away. I think there's some real opportunity for coordination. The Wilsonville Sharing group or that nonprofit does a fantastic job. I don't know. I think I don't know if we need to double it up. I'm open to whatever, but I also, quick question on the Veterans Village, Chair, before I pass. when you can't help but notice that when you go to the Veterans Village, there are an insane amount of electrical wires, like overhead, like going over to, it just, to be honest, it feels a little sketchy. I'm not an electrician. I'm sure it's up to code. Is there money or funds available to help deal with the electrical infrastructure issue around the Veterans Village? I see Dan. Dan, what are you giving me back there? Dan. But from just from the street view looking at it, yes, those buildings are issues, but
We
I don't
can look into it. We do not have a specific budget. I was trying to set aside a meaningful amount that could allow us to go a long ways there.
Okay.
Making the infrastructure more livable would be one of our priorities, so we can fold that into the things we're considering and then bring it back as far as if we can't go all the way, how do you want us to prioritize the investment there?
okay. Yeah, I'm perfect. That's it. That's all I got.
Regarding the food pantry in Tualatin, I think it's okay to use the secondary fund you talked about. What was that called again?
The Regional Strategies Implementation Fund.
Yes, that. There's so many funds, I can't even keep up. Would you
love
be,
a complicated
I know, would you be okay with that? Using,
I'm totally open to looking at it, but I just think logistically we have to where are all these resources popping
well, I think
up?
we need to make a decision today, and I will say, you may not know, but I think Mayor Frank Bubanek has been really lobbying hard, our county administrator, to make this happen.
And I
Very
met with
hard.
him last week on this.
And he says there's a huge need for that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, on
5
that.
miles is a long way to walk.
I was just thinking
Fair
that
enough,
they
yeah.
don't have cars.
Yeah.
or-
The transportation's
You know,
not
they don't
easy.
have any transportation,
Yeah.
so I'm all in on this Tualatin pantry.
Okay.
However we can help them.
I'll support it, but can we look at that?
I am
Thank
too.
you.
We'll just take it out of there. Commissioner Schul.
I just wanted to say that food insecurity is going up, not down. And I don't know the exact amount, but I know that nonprofits that are dealing with food support to our families, it's in the many, many tons of food going out each week. Just down here in Clackamas at the military support facility, several tons of food go out there every week throughout the region to support families that are in need. So I don't think we can have too many food pantries.
What's next, Adam?
So the second half of this presentation was intended to speak to our shared concern about the decrease in revenue, and what we're planning for next steps on that, and the funding that we've identified a portion of this one-time balance to help us through that transition. So as you know, Metro's newly released forecast decreases the county's anticipated revenue by over $10 million per year, about 14% starting in the current fiscal year. Like I said before, we're viewing this as a reset on the size of our tax base, not short-term volatility. And so we need to adjust the overall level of programs and services that we will be able to sustain into the future. We don't expect the need to make cuts in this current fiscal year. That's what I was meeting with our team about yesterday. However, we do need to pause any new ongoing investments to ensure that we're not continuing to build out a system that we can't afford.
Okay.
The clearest example of this is in our permanent supportive housing programs, which includes long-term rent assistance, vouchers, and supportive services. PSH programs account for just under 60% of our total SHS budget, about $43 million this year. Current year budget was forecasted revenue, $73 million. $43 million of that was budgeted for permanent supportive housing. This year, including a small number of future commitments to bond-funded projects and initiatives like the scattered site disposition, Clackamas County was on track to reach its share of the regional SHS goal to place 5,000 households in permanent supportive housing over the 10-year life of the measure. Our share of the goal, you've heard this many times from us, celebrating our achievement, is 1,065 households. Today, we have about 900 households placed and another 60 searching for apartments. While this milestone was something to celebrate, the cost to sustain rent assistance and services for 1,065 households will exceed the resources we have available in the context of the new forecast and any changes Metro's considering. So we're doing work right now to assess the number of households that we think we can sustain by the current forecast, and we'll continue to assess changes to the Metro measure that may further impact that. But we need to start planning and transitioning to an ongoing level of service well below the goal of 1,065 households. So how are we going to do that? We can't rely on attrition alone to reduce the number of households. Our current attrition rate is around 3% per year. That's a sign of our success. Housing retention is a product of our success. Transitioning to a lower level of system capacity will require investing in limited term programs to help people transition off of this support without impacting their housing stability. So there are a couple of specific examples for how we can do this, and we're proposing to set aside the remaining balance, the 18 million, to support these reductions in system capacity and preserve system stability during this transition over some limited term period here, likely 3 years. The first way that we can do this is by identifying households that are likely to be successful in moving on from county supportive housing assistance and place them on a path to self-sufficiency. A Housing for Success program would provide a limited term rent subsidy up to 3 years, intensive case management support, and a gradual reduction in housing assistance as households increase their self-sufficiency. Capacity for 100 households would cost about $8 million over a 3-year period, and this would immediately transition people from our PSH roles onto a separate program and decrease our ongoing commitment in PSH programs. The second way is through the development of intensive self-sufficiency programs like workforce development, barrier reduction for people seeking employment, money management, and programs that increase benefits access, including supplemental security income, Social Security, and Social Security disability insurance. These services would provide current households with increased income, reduce the county's portion of their housing costs, and help them to move on from supportive housing assistance. 3 years of comprehensive self-sufficiency programming would cost approximately $5 million. Now here's the hard part and the sad part for our system. When Vahid and I were initially contemplating coming back to you with our spend down update in May of last year, we were going to propose these same programs. We were going to propose those programs because when we have reached our threshold of 1,065, if we're not moving people on from our system, we're not ending homelessness for new households. We need a high rate of attrition so we can continue ending homelessness for the households that we haven't been able to serve. So I'm here today proposing the same investments, but for a much different reason. That reason is that we need to transition people off of our program because we can't now sustain them. So these investments are needed to ramp down the system, provide stability as we transition people off, and then in the future, we will need some amount of this program to do the same moving on from whatever our lower number is that we can sustain. We will always need that aspect of our system. Now we just need it because of this position that we're in, and we will need it even more so if Metro makes more changes. So I think we don't have all of the details fleshed out. We will propose to come back to you when we've done more work on this. Like yesterday, what we were talking with the team about is we need to identify the universe of people, the 950 people we're supporting, and figure out who can move on and be successful from our programs, right? That's what we were going to do anyways. So we got to do that work, figure out who they are, what their needs are. We're already doing supportive housing case management. So some of these things are already in place, but it's enhancing it and it's expediting it, and it's doing it so we can reduce our ongoing operating costs.
I think the idea is fascinating because we knew we had 10 years limited. We knew we'd have to be ending some of these programs and having people understand, okay, we have done this for you. Now it's time for you to do this for us, because your payback to the system is that you're prosperous, you're able to carry on and be self-sufficient, and we're offering those opportunities to them. I like the idea. I understand it's not fully fleshed out. Hasn't been tried before anywhere.
Yes, there are move-on programs, right? We want people to thrive on their own. That's the goal of this system. And so, yeah, but there are move-on programs. We know with our community partners what works to help stabilize folks, get them access to the employment resources.
Are there
they
any
need.
move-on programs in the two larger counties?
Not robust ones that I know of.
So we would be doing something kind of leading the way in the move-on programs. I assume there's move-on programs, like you say, in other jurisdictions in America. I just don't know what they are. But we are going to have to look at something like that, because the goal is to end homelessness, not perpetuate it with a 30-year tax. Because, in my opinion, it just keeps the nonprofits going. And we do need to really take a look at ending homelessness. Commissioner Savison and Commissioner West.
Yeah, so I guess this move on thing is, I haven't heard that brand, and I'm going to call it a brand, right? I would say that the Veterans Village is our first best example, prominent example of really attrition and having that pipeline into permanency, right, where they can be self-sufficient. So I'm not saying we're solved it completely and we're 100% successful, but we've got that. That's one example we can just look at. And Clayton Moore comes to mind as one of those products that helped that happen, which was really the permanent housing aspect. What I wanted to get back to, you mentioned the $8 million. What you're really talking about is a pipeline. Call it the nutrition pipeline is a pipeline. And so what I'm trying to get an idea is what the capacity of that is. So the $8 million that you were talking about potentially would move how many people through?
About 100 households. We
Okay.
could move them immediately off of our ARLA rolls and onto this program.
Okay, so that would allow, I get it. So, okay, that answers my question. Thank you. I'm all in.
Thank you, Paul.
Yay. Commissioner West.
Yeah, this is the final step of a recovery-oriented system of care. Self-sufficiency, as much as an individual or family can have independence, and to have them have that dignity again, rebuild that individual capital in their own life within their community to get there. This totally fits within that. This is our model. Thank you for that. Like, we've talked about that even before we knew there were looming cuts, Adam. We'd had private conversations about the goal.
And that's why this is what we intended to propose anyways,
Yeah.
right? It was the next step in the development of our system.
Yes, and so, like, we were once again ahead of the entire region on how this would happen. I appreciate that, but I'm, like, really concerned about those that can't or may never be able to move on. Like, there are a segment of our population that we have a moral duty to make sure there's a safety net and that they don't languish in our streets or where they have been and they don't go backwards. I want to know your opinion or thoughts if we're like, there's going to be a real threat of a cliff here that we cannot avoid and we're about to careen off of that cliff. And then what's the impact to our neighbors that we had made some headway with? And then what's the impact with the trust that we have built over this time frame? And we just got started and now we're getting, I feel like, the rug pulled out from under us. You're right, this is the plan that we have to go with and do it this way, but I don't think we have a clear picture about, this doesn't sound like, I'm not convinced we have a fix-all here with what we're facing.
No, it's certainly not a fix-all, and we will have a challenge as we approach 2030. But I think, Board, what I've heard you say over the last couple of months is, let's demonstrate our ability to be successful and meet community expectations, and then let's talk about
Yes.
how we support the households that are unable to maintain stable housing on their own. So that has been a conversation that's resonated with us, right? We have to demonstrate our ability to be successful. That's the community's expectation. Let's earn that trust and credibility and respect, and then let's have a conversation about what would be a cliff in 2030 for the percentage of the population that we know is going to really struggle and need some ongoing level of support.
Yeah, and just for the record, I think it's also hard when we're in a room full of politicians that helped push the policies that gave the business fatigue and the taxpayers a lot of heartburn in Portland, and then they're crying about how they governed a certain way and had bad outcomes and why those people are leaving their city and they're coming to Clackamas or they're going to Vancouver or they're going to Idaho or wherever else, but they're not staying in Portland. That's true. And now they're crying about, you know, the shortfalls they're all going to have. When they created the policies that like led us here, and now they're the one tax that like we pay and we don't love paying, but we know we have a moral duty to like do the best we can with this population. I cut that check and I go, well, thank God we're doing it right in Clackamas, or I trust how we're doing it, and we got to get ahead of this. And we cut that check just like a lot of businesses and families do. But I don't see them going after all their other little sacred cows that we're there to fund, very ideologically driven agenda items that are also a ton of other taxes but those taxes don't impact the very like lives of individuals that are living in our streets. And so for whatever reason, they're going after this one. And I just want to say, I'm just really concerned that what Metro and what is about to do is really going to continue, is going to continue to show that we don't have the trust of the voters, that we are going to come off a cliff here. And we don't have any accountability for the actions that we're taking currently. But yeah, thank you for that. I support this effort that you're doing.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, we need to wrap up this session, make a decision, and then we're going to go to the next session on lottery dollars right away as the folks are in here, because I think we can get that done. What is fueling a lot of the new measure is community expectations, and polling has indicated that the public doesn't see any improvement in what's being done. But I don't think that's true in Clackamas County. And that's what's been fueling the Portland Metro Chamber, is that, well, what is your success? What is you're collecting too much money? You know, whether that's true or not, I don't know. So I am ready to accept a motion from the board on moving forward on this. And in that, in the motion, does it include the city-led initiatives of Milwaukee and Tualatin? And I would also like to see the Veterans Village added. Adam, can you speak to that?
So you have three options. Approve the recommendations. Everything I've outlined here is the approved recommendations. Option number 2 is to modify them. We've heard one modification, which is to look into using the regional strategies funds for the
I see.
Tualatin investment.
Okay.
Or reject the plan.
Oh, I see, okay. Yeah, Paul.
So I kind of also asked, and I think in my questions to Adam earlier, in his response, it sounds to me like they're thinking through this correctly. So I want to just acknowledge your good work, you know, your staff, all of you, and know that what we're really talking about is right-sizing and calibrating our systems so that we can maximize every dollar and so forth. So I see that as you know, it's always going to be, we're always going to have to recalibrate a little bit, right? So it's dynamic. And at the same token do you feel with all these things taking place that in 30 days or 60 days, you might want to come back to us and recalibrate this again, or should we just wait? So I'm just looking for what you feel is appropriate. You know, that idea I had about, you know, or just at least I'm comfortable doing something, but if you think we can actually do a little bit better job by re-examining, giving you the time, then I'm willing to give you the time. I don't think there's going to be any there's no issue where we're in a disagreement here today. So you have the support. What do you really need from us today?
I think that we've tried to create that time in this plan by coming back once we've fleshed out the specific programs and the amounts on that transition period funding. I think nothing that I would learn in the next 60 days would impact the other recommendations, the investments in recovery-oriented infrastructure, these modest city investments to continue those partnerships, and Vets Village. Those things I think we should move on, and we have time built in on the other stuff. But if Metro moves forward with these changes, we will only need to go farther in moving people off the programs. That's why I'm comfortable with that investment in general, that's what we need to do.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Shaw, you ready for a motion? It looks like you're ready.
I have one, a slight modification to number
Go
1.
ahead.
I move to approve the recommended updates to the plan for the one-time and limited investment funded by the carryover balance of SHS funds, with the exception of the Tualatin Food Pantry to be utilized, to be funded by Regional Strategy Fund, and the $250,000 that was earmarked for that be moved to the Recovery Center project. How's that?
I'll second.
There we go. We have a motion on the table that has been seconded. Do you have a comment on that?
No.
Thank you. You okay with the motion? I will, Commissioner Scholl has moved we approve the recommended updates to the plan for one-time and limited-term investments funded by the carryover balance of SHS funds and fund the Tualatin Food Pantry from the Regional Strategies Fund, and then back that money out and put it toward the Recovery Center. And it's been seconded by Commissioner West. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you understand that? Okay, good. Thank you very much. Any other comments on this?
I have one, it might be a little bit off topic, but I just have one I wanted to share, and I forgot to share that, and that is that, by the way, if they actually extend this for 20 years, the tax increase would be about $8 billion. So if you need a
The
number.
increase?
Yeah, and now, that's a rough number, I haven't affirmed that, but I just tell you that's been the estimate based on the reduction multiplied out over another 20 years. So that's how much of a reduction it is not.
It is not. It is not a reduction of $8 billion. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it is not a reduction, it's an increase.
Okay, thank you. All right. Commissioner West, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm sure that government will find a way to spend it and still want more. I'm sure that they will find a way to not be efficient, to spend every dime of it and then to beg for more. So-
And there will not be one elected official around to be accountable.
None of us will be
in-
here.
In 30 years
Yeah.
for the $8 billion.
So there's no accountability.
There's no accountability.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Would the clerk please take the poll?
Commissioner Savis,
Aye.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Madam Chair.
Aye, motion passes 4-0. Thank you much. You have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, commissioners, for your support.
You betcha.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your work.
Yes, good work. Great work. Nancy, what's next?
Sorry, we're moving a session that was scheduled for 1 o'clock this afternoon to now, since we're running ahead. This is for the Lottery Dollars Arts Grant Program, Part 2. And the presenters are Dan Johnson, the Director of Transportation and Development, and Laura Edmonds, who is our Director for Economic Development.
Thank you for coming forward. Go ahead and introduce yourselves, and you may
Thanks for
start.
keeping us on our toes. We're just like, hey, we're doing this session, not one, we're doing 11. Chair Smith, Commissioners, Dan Johnson, Director of the Department of Transportation and Development.
Laura Edmonds, Manager of the Office of Economic Development.
And we are here to once again talk to all of you and get some guidance on some art investments that the board had directed us. I want to just state a couple things. Back in June 26th to be specifically, the board directed staff to research local organizations that could provide supportive grants to artists and cultural organizations that reside in Clackamas County. Staff came back and confirmed to the board that one exists, essentially the Clackamas County Cultural Coalition. This organization provides funding to support Clackamas County-based artists and organizations who support artists. To the best of our knowledge, no similar entity exists within the county from the research that we've done. I want to highlight the fact that the coalition, there is a coalition that exists in every county, and essentially they're the responsibility to plan, receive, and administer state funds, essentially the Oregon Cultural Trust funds, and distribute those out to certain applicants for the betterment of art throughout the community. The coalition is a volunteer group. I think it's important to understand that. There's not a lot of bench depth on this group. They essentially volunteer their time, review applications, and distribute those funds consistent with their guiding documents. They receive approximately $20,000 to $50,000 per year on average from the Cultural Fund. They have a competitive application process, and their awards essentially run $750 to $3,000 per applicant, depending on who and what they're trying to do with those funds. The coalition is supported by the Clackamas County Arts Alliance as their fiscal agent. Essentially, and with that fiscal agent responsibility, they have about a 15% administrative fee on top of that. Not super bad, not great, but it's the dollars on top of it. And they've informed us that the coalition, in cooperation with CCAA, is equipped and willing to administer the art grant program on behalf of Clackamas County, subject to their established criteria. Essentially, what we'd be looking to do, if we get guidance from the board today about either supporting interest in working with this entity, we'd work with county council and develop a funding agreement. In that funding agreement, we would stipulate kind of our objectives and responsibilities and desires for those funds and how they should be used. And we would come back in front of the Board of County Commissioners with that funding agreement for final authorization and final approval. I want to highlight the fact there were a couple questions asked at our last update. Those are found on attachment A. Just some general questions around kind of, do they work with federal funds? Are they a 501c3? All those responses we've kind of queued up for you on the attachment. We've also, if you recall, harken back, a lot of this discussion started with the dialogue around county's funding of RAC. And so what we also included in your packet on attachment B is just kind of a history of RAC art funding throughout the region, throughout Clackamas County. Yes, they did bring in and leverage some additional dollars, but this kind of gives you a breakdown. You'll see that the majority of the applications they are approving are of similar size to the ones the coalition does on the higher end. Some are a little bit more. There are a couple of outliers that a number of members of the board have kind of taken interest in that are a little bit higher, and we can talk about those. But we're here essentially to seek your guidance on how we would like to advance funding of arts within Clackamas County. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Laura, do you have any comments?
No, not at this time.
Thank you very much. Commissioner West, you're up.
First question, when I see Lakewood Center for the Arts, is that the Lakewood Theater? Or is that a different entity?
That, I believe that is the entity you're referring to.
Okay, and is this include, when we look at this history, the money that is like, that was directly given, but not what was also leveraged for the total amount? Or is it the total amount? I don't know, my question's not that clear, but.
It is the total amount.
The total amount, including what was leveraged by RAC?
Correct.
Okay. Right now you came to us and said, hey, we got the Clackamas County Cultural Coalition, and they could run a grants program through this organization. I think you've expressed, Dan, that you don't really want to be dealing with grants in-house within Clackamas County, or you don't think we should go through an organization like this, or do you have a recommendation around that?
I can clearly articulate to you that the current staff
Doesn't want to.
We do not have a lot of art expertise and the ability to review these applications, so it's probably better through some entity is currently doing this to evaluate those and the benefits they have for the community.
Okay. And have we heard from any of these organizations that we've historically given some funds to about what now and how do we move forward? And I'm sure not everybody on here has reached back out to the county and said, we have a funding crisis now because none of these organizations have reached out after not working with RAC anymore?
No, they have not. The only conversations we've had are with the Arts Alliance, the Cultural Coalition. We've spoken to the state level, the state organizations, but none of these artists have reached out directly, no.
Okay, what's the difference between those two Clackamas County? We have the Arts Alliance and you have the Cultural Coalition. What are the differences? What do they do differently?
So the Cultural Coalition is the volunteer board made up by the state organized organization to administer the state funds through the trust. Then the Arts Alliance is an independent organization that they're the fiscal agent for the coalition. And as a fiscal agent, they are the organization that is structured to help provide the support mechanisms for the artists and art organizations in the region.
Yeah.
They provide services for the Cultural Coalition. They provide services such as financial reporting, the grants management, because they have the system in place to do that. They help them to manage all of their budgetary, like if they do audits, those kinds of things, anything financial and operational, that's why they get paid the 15%. So they actually manage operations and the fiscal responsibility for the Cultural Coalition. But they also, in their programs, they also offer free education for artists who are applying for grants. They do training, and they set up like arts activities and events throughout the region to be able to help promote those artists, to be able to sell their art.
Yeah, so they are a separate entity that provides separate funding. The only connection between the coalition and the Arts Alliance is the fact that they're just helping them as a fiscal agent. That's it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And so 15% seems a little high for, like, that number stuck out to me. Can you explain that
It's actually pretty
administrative? Is it?
Yeah, it's pretty good for what they do, because if you think about, they are their bookkeeper, they are actually their grants management team. They help them with their website development and updates. They help them with their bookkeeping. So when you think about all the costs associated with hiring or contracting with each individual that would perform that service, a 15% fee is very insignificant compared to the amount of work that they're doing.
Okay.
Yep.
I know for me, and I don't know how we want to move forward, I tend to always default, I don't want to give up, especially with these dollars, board approval or oversight. I don't mind being advised. But I do know that the Liquid Theater could really use additional ongoing support and relied on funding from the county. Another organization was the Music Project over there in West Lynn, which was a significant, like bedrock organization in the community. And maybe there's a couple others we know of. I don't know how we should move forward. I do want to make sure that those entities that are well-known, that are well-established, that do have a large community impact for a significant number of people, that we continue to look at supporting those. I don't know about, there's a lot of it looks like smaller artists, one-off type of supports too. We have limited funds. I like to see those funds get the most bang for their buck for the most people in the community with the organizations that have the most historical, long-standing reputation and operation within Clackamas County. That's where I feel, and I don't necessarily want to give up the board's sign-off on directly at the end of the day where these funds go. I think maybe the board could be advised, but I would like to see the board, have a direct relationship with these organizations and how those fundings get dispersed. That's my thoughts on it today.
Commissioner Scholl.
So can we expect that the Clackamas County Cultural Coalition will make an effort to publish countywide the ability for folks to apply for these grants?
The funding opportunity?
Yeah,
Yes, I believe so. They have a focus on Clackamas County in its entirety.
countywide. Okay, so the word would get out to everybody. And then the grants would only be approved for county residents that apply? Is that correct?
Or organizations.
Or organizations,
The
yeah.
board can stipulate whatever conditions they want to place in that money. So,
Okay.
and we've heard the fact that we want those dollars from you.
Yeah.
Want those dollars to go to Clackamas County artists that reside in Clackamas County.
Yeah, so, yeah, I'd be concerned that those grants go to artists and art-related organizations in Clackamas County. And that the other concern would be that the board maintain some control over it to make sure that these grants are being given out in an equitable way, so that we don't have just the same organizations and individuals being granted the money each year. So will the recommendations from the Clackamas County Cultural Coalition come to the BCC for final approval?
The way it's currently proposed, no. I mean, right now, that's a consideration we can take under advisement if you'd like to do that. Right now, the idea was to fund them, let them go out and do the good work they do, to try to distribute those funds. But what I keep hearing is this, like these one-offs, and I think the one-offs are kind of confused. Confusing isn't the word I'm looking at, but there's a desire from the board to directly fund some of these entities. If that's a desire, we can just reduce the funding amount that goes to the coalition and pull that money separately, and the board can bring forward a funding request from these entities if they like to.
I have some concerns about that, too, in terms of the time that would be taken by the BCC to do that. The other thing, too, is Commissioner West makes a comment regarding, viable comment regarding need for funding for the Lakewood Theater. But we also have the Boring Players, we have the Sandy Theater, we have the Welch's Players also. So maybe it would be in the best interest for the coalition to make the decisions and just give us a courtesy update on, briefing on what they've done, and we'll just see how that goes. Thank you.
Before I go to Commissioner Savas, what we might want to do is list categories like music, theater, and art. And then that would cover what you both have said regarding the one-offs. And also, is this perpetual, or is this a limited time duration that we use this organization for this money?
Right now, we're looking at like a one-year funding opportunity. We assess these, the board directs, we have a discussion with the board on an annual basis about how these entities are funded. And this is a new discussion we're having.
So this could be like a pilot program.
Correct.
Well, let's try it for 1 year
Yep.
with the categories that I mentioned, and then come back for a report to the board to see if you want to do it the next year.
Yep.
That may be a way to do it. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I know we discussed this multiple times, and would like to move forward with something and give this group here an opportunity to show us what they can do. I do see it as a pilot, frankly. We have all the discretion in the world to, in the future, add to it, subtract from it, and so on. But I would like to see a process in which everyone, regardless who they are or where they are in Clackamas County, feel as though that they have a fair shot at competing and not have us influence that one way or another. If we feel that there's a great need and it wasn't addressed, we can always come back and add to it. But I would really like to give it the free rein without influence for these folks to do the work and see how it goes. The idea of categories that the chair mentioned, I don't have any issue with that. That's probably reasonable.
I tried to make them as broad-based.
Yeah.
And two, we might want to add a diverse population, but within Clackamas County residents and organizations. Let's just try it. I'd like, if we could, like you say, get this done, get it out the door, see how it works. If the board doesn't like it, you can revisit it next year, or however long it takes to do this.
Yep.
Commissioner West.
I like the idea of a pilot program because there's still we're kind of feeling this out.
Yeah.
I do want the ultimate decision for funding sources to come before the board. I don't want the coalition to make the decision. I think that the board should have input. Can the coalition advise us through the pilot program and say, hey, here's the applicants, here we go, and then the board says up or down on funding? What do you think about that?
Well, I think, first of all, my hard answer is no. How many times have we talked about this? And one of the commissioners isn't even here, who has her own ideas to get this done. I think we need to get it done. I think, Commissioner West, if you wanted to fund something, then make the motion to fund that. We'll take it out of the pot, but I do think we need to try the coalition. In the past, this board gave great trust to RAC to make these decisions, okay? RAC has disappeared, okay, for whatever reasons. So we're kind of revisiting it, but with the guidelines that it's a pilot 1 year to a diverse entities in Clackamas County that includes residents and organizations that looks at music, theater, art. Is there anything else that I missed in that? I don't know. I tried to be as broad-based as possible with the categories. And we don't have to do it today. I'm trying to get this across the finish line.
I'll go along with whatever the board thinks. I And I don't know, I'm not ready to say, hey, I really want to, I think that there is a great need at the Lakewood Center for the Arts, but I also haven't talked to anybody. I don't know exactly what that need is. I don't even know like what number to give to it, so I'm not prepared to pull out anything, even if I think it's quite worthy and we should be supporting it, because that work hasn't really been done, and I don't know those numbers, so it'd be foolish for me to just, go off of previous numbers or to make something up. So based on like Commissioner Schrader's not here, I'm really interested in what she thinks about this. I know like she has a lot of strong feelings. I'm willing to go with whatever the board decides here, even if it isn't exactly how I see it playing out.
I'll accept a motion.
I move that we direct staff to, option one here, direct staff to advance the lottery arts grant program funding agreement with Clackamas County Cultural Coalition and provide funding support of $100,000 with a slight amendment of the categories listed by the chair. That's my motion.
Okay, and Clackamas County residents and businesses or organizations?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
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 Seconded.
Commissioner Savas has moved that we direct staff to advance lottery grant program funding agreement with the Clackamas County Cultural Coalition and provide funding of $100,000.
Theater.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Savas's motion asks for the chair's listed amendments to be adopted. For clarity's sake, I just please have you.
I'm going to say those.
Thank you, Chair.
I was mid-sentence in saying those. Thank you. I will restate the motion. Commissioner Savas has moved to direct staff to advance a lottery arts grant program funding agreement with the Clackamas County Cultural Coalition and provides funding support of $100,000 and include the categories of music, theater, and art to residents and organizations within Clackamas County, and Commissioner Scholl has seconded that motion. Correct? Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Before we take the vote, I would like to say this does not preclude any commissioner to reaching out to any of these organizations or reaching out to this cultural coalition and say, hey, what do you think about this? I don't think that's undue influence, but if we are uncertain about this coalition and want to learn more, that's an opportunity that can be had, I think, by anybody. Seeing no further comment, would the clerk please take the poll?
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Madam Chair.
Aye, motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will recess until 1:30 and take up our last policy session for the year.
At 1:30, okay.
Or do you want to come back at 1?
1:30 or 2.
Okay,
1:30.
we'll do 1:30. There you go. That works for me. Thank you very much.
Good.
Good afternoon. We are continuing the policy sessions from this morning, December 18. It is the afternoon at 1:30. COO Nancy Bush, who is substituting for Gary Schmidt today because he's out of the office. Please continue.
Yes, so next we have the Clackamas County Main Street Courthouse request for expressions of interest. I am the presenter for this particular topic today. So this policy session is regarding the Main Street Courthouse request for expressions of interest, and staff are seeking the board approval for their RFEI and to move forward with the process. So just as a reminder for the public that may be listening, the Main Street Courthouse is scheduled to be vacated in May of 2025. The current courthouse is still on time and on budget. The board directed staff to pull together a group to provide a recommendation for the Main Street Courthouse, which included leadership from Morgan City, Clackamas County, and other local organizations. The board accepted the recommendation in November of 2024 and directed staff to develop a process in alignment with the recommendation. To ensure maximum flexibility in the way the board moves forward, staff are proposing requests for expressions of interest. The RFEI in your packet provides context to the property and surroundings, lays out the broad strokes for the county's vision for the future of the property. Some important things to note from the RFEI that you're looking at is the need for detail related to how the proposal contributes to the economic vitality of the downtown Oregon City area and provides a compelling vision for the property. The ability of the proposer to move quickly to implement and to secure funding. preservation of the historical significance of the building in consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office, preference for a standard purchase and sale transaction with conditions of sale to be negotiated, a preference for retention of the portion of the site known as Liberty Plaza, either through incorporation into the final transaction or through a lot line adjustment that would separate the plaza from the parcel. The timeline suggested by the staff is to finalize any changes that may be directed here today by the board and publish the RFEI as soon as we can and have proposals due around February 28th of 2025. And with that, I'll open up for some questions, discussion.
Commissioner West, you're up.
Thank you. Am I on? Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Did the board, we also received a letter from Mayor McGriff. She's not here with us today.
That is correct. All of you received an email from Mayor McGriff.
Yeah, and basically, Mayor McGriff wants us to not make any decisions today or postpone our final decision on the proposed RFEI until additional meetings between the city and the county can occur to discuss this redevelopment opportunity on Main Street, and that we postpone any final decision on disposition of Liberty Plaza and including the demolition of the building as part of the RFEI process. I just wanted to make sure that we knew, that the board knew. I don't know if you had a chance that Mayor McGriff had some thoughts around that, and she's the mayor of Oregon City where this Main Street is. So I just wanted to bring that forward.
I read the letter, and maybe you're not aware, but I will reiterate again that Mayor McGriff and I co-hosted a very large effort of 3 community meetings that consisted of people who represented probably every facet of Oregon City interest in this property. She sat through the meetings. We had a facilitator in Shelley Perini. Nancy Bush attended. Laura Edmonds attended as part of our county contingent. Emily Klepper was also there as staff.
Right.
Denise McGriff was there, and she brought her economic director fellow. And we can give you the makeup, but I think we listed that. Every single possible reiteration, iteration, and proposal was discussed during this group.
Yes.
And Mayor McGriff's focus seemed to be to preserve it for historical purposes. And we all pretty much agreed that that lone piece would not be adequate to what the Board of County Commissioners are thinking. And I can explain that in a minute. Not once during this opportunity, and it was a very large opportunity, and we have minutes and we have people, did she say she wanted to meet privately? So if she's interested, I think she can go through the same process that every other person with an interest in the property can. She can do a proposal through the REIF, correct? And would be considered equally. But we do have criteria.
Yes.
You need to be able to provide financing, give us a sustainable plan that moves quickly, and put the property back on the tax rolls for an ROI. And that came through really strong with these community leaders, and it consisted of the downtown business organizations, the chamber. Who else was on there, Nancy?
Those were the ones that came to my mind, those two.
And I
we can
received
get a list.
innumerable comments and emails and privately to say that that is really in the best interest of Oregon City to go forward with that. So I see a couple lights on. Does Tony want to come forward?
So I think Tony has the complete list.
Oh, okay.
So
And
Tony,
we
you wanna
we
come
can go over
forward?
that in a minute. And so we started with an appraisal and a condition of the building, a big, large packet. I'm not sure if you have that here.
I do.
And the main recommendation was to tear it down, just to tear it down. And I thought we were very generous in saying, we really don't want to tear it down because it does have some interesting historical components. But we saw pictures, and it behooved the commissioners to take a look at these pictures. I thought maybe you did already. sight of how really poorly this building is in. You know, we see a lot of marble, we walk in, that's just a facade over poorly constructed walls that could go in a New York minute in the event that we had an earthquake. And so with that in mind, we have allowed flexibility, I think, in the group and the recommendations. I think this board, in considering what we're going to consider today, has allowed flexibility in the considerations. And I think we just need to see what comes forward on that. I have Commissioner Scholl on, and then Commissioner Savas.
So regarding the issue of Liberty Plaza, I think as we receive in the request for expressions of interest to see what our potentials are for sale of this property, after we can review those, then we can look at what the potential impact is, what the future is of the Liberty Plaza. Do we sell it as part of the rest of the property? Do we do some special provision to strip it out of the sale? That's something that we can look at after the RFEIs come in. I have a question, though, on the big picture of this regarding our property that we own across the street at 821 Main Street, which is the Ralph M. Holman Law Center. Have we considered putting those properties on the market at the same time that the courthouse goes on the market to potentially enhance the attractiveness of the situation?
So it's a good question, Commissioner. And yes, we've had those discussions. There's a couple things about that building that we need to retain it because it has items in it that are very difficult to move. We have some servers in there that would be also very expensive to move. We also don't have a place to move them at this time. And we are also putting H3S in that building as well and getting them out of a building that is rented.
Okay.
And so it would go to a building that we own.
So you got a plan for that. All right,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you very much.
In consideration of the courthouse, it was just the courthouse and where the land sits. We did not ask about the Liberty Plaza, although if an offer came through in this process, this probably could be considered, just like any other offer is considered. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, no, thanks. So I guess I'll be maybe directing my questions to staff then a little bit. So as I read the email from the mayor, and I recall, maybe I don't recall correctly or accurately, from our last discussion on the dais here as the Board of County Commissioners with regard to Liberty Plaza, I made the assumption that we were all on board, right? That the city mayor were all on board. I learned after the session was over, when I went to talk to the mayor, that there's some nuances to it, and I didn't understand all that. So I know that she was going to reach out to Gary, and I guess was scheduled to meet out for Gary either late today, or which is now he's ill. So
tomorrow.
Okay, so it's tomorrow. So I want to understand that. I've been pinged for the last over a year, we all have probably, from all different interested parties, whether they're not necessarily, I don't mean to say that they're interested in purchasing the building, but they're interested in the disposition of the building, and a lot of Oregon City people. I totally recognize that this is closer to Oregon City as an issue than it is to Clackamas County, right? We have a monetary interest, but what's good for Oregon City economically is going to be good for the county economically. So to me, I would say that if it accomplishes good economic outcomes, that's a win for all of us, right? But I also want to recognize, I do think because, it is in the heart of downtown Oregon City, that's important, that's a big deal. They ought to have a strong role in this. But I thought in our last session that Liberty Plaza was clearly going to be retained or be transferred somehow, right? And it would remain the plaza. It would remain as an Oregon City asset in some form of ownership or another. That's what I assumed. Okay, now maybe I'm in error.
Okay, I would just.
I'll support it. Point of order. I never, ever knew that, Paul.
Okay, well, I'm saying,
I know.
I'm willing to be mistaken here, so,
Well,
yeah.
and maybe I'm mistaken because maybe somebody had a policy session that I was absent at. Heck if I know. Go ahead.
So my understanding is that we've been going through this process, which I started at the beginning. That was never, it was never said that Liberty Plaza was going to be transferred. It was never part of the discussions that we had with the group that we pulled together to give recommendations. So if that has been something that's been discussed, it was outside of my reach.
Okay, I know it came up, and you mentioned it about the lot line, someone mentioned potential lot line adjustment to carve that out separately.
That's actually in the document.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
That's correct. That's correct.
So then the other one was, which caught me by surprise, it's in the packet, obviously, but, and this kind of goes to conversations we already had today and recently, but I'll digress, go back to my point. I didn't realize that until recently that there's I won't say a recommendation, but there's almost a tilting of the scales to say, hey, by the way, look at this as a tear down, right? So that's kind of new to me. And it's not directing a tear down, but it's consideration that what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to make sure and ask more of a legal question as well here. Is this REFI that we're going to be putting out there, is there anything that would influence an outcome one way or another, or is it totally unbiased?
So our goal was to be unbiased. Our goal was to say there's a lot of possibilities, and we just want to hear what you're thinking, and then go through those, and then bring them to the board. So that was our goal, was to be unbiased. There's we can't, someone could refurbish the building. There's limitations to that, right? And, or they could say, yeah, we want to do a tear down, we want to put this, or we want to preserve different parts of the building, and then, do some, in whatever they want to do. So the goal was to say, what are your thoughts? Very open-ended and open-minded. What are your thoughts?
Right. So you feel pretty confident the way this is structured, there's no finger on the scale or a leaning one way or another. That they're going to try to appeal to our particular likings or suggestions.
So I will say I think it's probably fair to, maybe we have legal take a look at it and see if their thoughts are.
Yeah,
or maybe they already have.
I am looking at page 4, and it says submittals may contemplate reuse of the existing building, renovation of the existing building, demolition and construction of a new building, or any combination thereof. So it does seem to be fairly bring all proposals rather than driving toward one particular outcome.
Okay. And let's just jump to, let's say we get this all back. How, I know that we own the building, we own the property underneath it. There's no disagreement about that. But I guess my question is what opportunities will there be for the city input as to what we do as far as the disposition with this, right?
So we can invite the city to be on the review board as we review proposals.
Okay. That's all I have for the moment.
If we invite Oregon City to be on the review board, and they have an interest in obtaining the property, I believe it is a finger on the scale in their favor.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good point. Thank you, Chair. If they actually do give a proposal, they would not be eligible to sit on it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would
Thank you
encourage them
for-
actually
yeah.
to propose, but they can't be.
They can't do both.
Yeah, they can't do both.
They can't do both.
It's
That
one or
is
the other.
correct.
And they're also issuing the permits, and they're also approving the zoning and/or changing the zoning. But in this document, the zoning is highlighted, the current use.
Correct.
And I suppose a new proposer that comes in looks at the zoning and says, I want to do something else, then it's up to them to acquire new zoning within the parameters of what is being presented and/or approved by this commission at a later date.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner West and then Commissioner Scholl.
So I remember having a meeting with Mayor McGriff in my office, and she brought up the Liberty Plaza concern outside of what was talked about within the 3 meetings that y'all had. And I remember bringing this Liberty Plaza up when she was here at the last meeting in the audience, and she was recognized. But it was made clear that it wasn't really within the scope of what had been talked about. Clearly, it's impacted because it's kind of like part of the property. It's right there. And I am totally fine with Liberty Plaza existing in some capacity, with it being an open space in Main Street. I think that that's fair. I don't see a clear understanding on how our decision today impacts that in any way, like as if that won't be able to still be the case moving forward. But a little bit of the confusion around how Liberty Plaza plays into this, I think, is a little bit muddied because of the conversations outside of the structured meetings that you guys had. That's how I now, looking back at this, see this playing out. And so I think it's important for us to talk about, but I also, is it fair to say it's not really within the scope of what we're discussing today? Not that it's not an important issue, but.
So the reason, and if you do look at the RFEI, it is discussed in there because, excuse me, it is part of the same parcel.
Yeah.
That's why in here, we have to be very clear with anyone who might, it's like,
But the disposition wasn't really within the scope of the group, am I correct?
that is correct, though.
So
That
like
is
we're talking about
correct.
that parcel specifically, fine. That's pretty limited with what,
You are correct.
right? Like, I think it's getting convoluted a little bit.
It probably is, because
Okay.
it's, yes,
Okay.
yes.
You want to know what convoluted is, you should have sat on the 3 meetings. Okay, just saying.
Fair.
And we have extensive minutes on those.
And I'm not trying to complicate things here today. I wanted to give Mayor McGrirt the respect that her email was received, and that it seems like there was at least enough questions about it because of side conversations happening with, maybe it sounds like maybe with you, Commissioner's Office, and myself regarding that issue. So that's why I brought it up.
And I think we've probably all had side conversations with Mayor McGriff. Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, for people who are listening, I just want to make one comment to help clarify this Liberty Plaza issue. On the request for expression of interest for the real estate acquisition for development concepts for the Clackamas County Main Street Courthouse, it states, a portion of the site known as Liberty Plaza was consolidated into the current parcel in 2012 after the demolition of the Liberty Theater and construction of the plaza in 2004. Submittals should contemplate preserving the existing open space on the site known as Liberty Plaza, either as part of the final project or through a lot line adjustment to separate the two portions. But the county will consider alternative proposals. So everything's open right now for
Thank you,
consideration.
Commissioner West. Scholl, beg your pardon.
Yeah, for
Didn't want to
consideration.
confuse
Thank you.
All right, let's move on with this policy presentation today. Tony, do you have some additional information for us?
Chair Smith, you asked earlier about the list of members of that Main Street Courthouse Committee. I do have that list in front of me. That included the staff from Oregon City and elected officials from Oregon City, the Downtown Oregon City Alliance, the Oregon City Chamber of Commerce, the Oregon City Business Alliance, and county staff and elected leadership.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And reading into the record. Nancy, is there anything else?
No, nothing else to present, so we're looking for a decision today, or?
I want to ask one question, and whoever wants to get in the queue, whatever. Jane, I want to talk to you, your opinion on the historical relevance of the courthouse. What aspects need to be considered with that? Because we all agree, it's a beautiful old lady. I mean, I would hope to age as gracefully as this courthouse has from the outside. And the elements in there, maybe they can be taken and used, and incorporation, I'm not saying that is a must, but anyone interested in the acquisition of this property, is looking at that. So is there any mandates from the state or otherwise?
There is, so my office did look at this early on. This is a historical building. There is a state historical preservation society. When a local government is going to dispose of a historical building, it is asked to consult with the historical society, but that's it. So really, the ultimate decision is still up to the local government, but I believe there is a consultation piece as part of the ultimate disposition.
Okay, a consultation and, okay, to do whatever and take in ideas. This document is interesting going forward. So can we review for a moment, because I want to be as transparent as possible, exactly what the REIF is?
Yes. Or do you want to go ahead and cover that? Because Tony did a lot of investigating
Tony?
into this.
Thank you very much.
First, apologies, I did not introduce myself earlier. Tony Marnick, Policy Advisor. I am the avatar of a team of people that helped write this document. The request for expressions of interest is an open-ended ask. We're asking the world, what would you like to do with this building? When we receive requests, a committee or staff will be reviewing against some criteria. Those criteria are not definitive or binding, they are guidance. We would ultimately be coming to the board and saying, board, these are the proposals we've received, here's what staff would recommend, what would the board like to do? Some of those criteria that we're looking at, we talked about earlier.
Or what page are you on?
Let me get to that page.
I believe it's 9.
Yes. So,
9
Selection,
of the agreement or 9 of the packet?
page 9 of the agreement.
selection criteria?
So when we have proposals, we would be looking at those proposals' financial capacity to acquire the property and implement their proposal. Part of that is we want folks to actually buy and put the property to work, not as a let's sit on this and someday, years from now, decide to do something with the property. That was clear from the board's direction and from the Main Street Courthouse Committee that whoever's buying this needs to put it to work in some fashion. We would be looking at their experience delivering similar proposals. For example, I've never done this before. If I came and submitted a project, I might score lower than somebody who does this all the time. A real estate developer with capacity and resources is going to score higher, but we're going to bring all options to the table because there may be a better idea out there that maybe didn't score as well. Contribution to the economic vitality of the downtown Oregon City area. The board, the courthouse committee, everyone who I have spoken with has made it clear, please bring something downtown that brings economic vitality to the downtown area. We are not looking for something that would simply contribute to someone distance's economic vitality. The courthouse has impacts on the surrounding businesses, and they are looking for something that will bring similar impact. Preservation of the historic significance of the building and its environs. The building is historically significant, largely because of its use as a county courthouse. It is also a Art Deco building from 1934, 1935, built by the Works Progress Administration, and there is significance in that. However, preservation does not necessarily mean the building in its current state now and forever. It is some recognition of what that building was used for. Retention of the portion of the site known as Liberty Plaza, we talked about that a little bit, is right now, legally speaking, it is all one parcel, one site. Otherwise, we would be asking somebody, hey, I want you to buy the house, but not the yard. Most transactions don't work like that. We're looking for someone. Now, in the course of those discussions, we're going to encourage, we'd like to keep the plaza. There's clear interest in keeping the plaza. But if there is a more compelling vision that doesn't, we don't want to take it off the table because the board directed, please bring good options to the table. Whether they kept it as part of the project or separated it out and there were two parcels side by side, that would be a part of the discussion with whoever was proposed to move forward with. Last but not least, project timelines, anticipated opening dates are the priority given to someone who can move quickly. We recognize there's going to be a lull between the county moving out and opening of whatever opens, But we don't want it to be a 2-year lull like some of the other projects in the Portland area that have been waiting for somebody to put them to work.
Or a 10-year low.
And so the intention is, broadly speaking, we'd love to know what would proposers like to do with the property so that we can look at those proposals and bring them all to the table and say, hey, here's what we've got. And then we've left it very open-ended for that reason.
Thank you. You know, somebody during our committee discussions brought up, oh, it's the idea, let's turn it into a museum. Unanimously, that was put down, even by our historic preservationists, because, number one, we have enough historical properties in Oregon City that we can't afford to maintain as they are. And we know Museum of the Oregon Territory is one of them, of which this board has generously given contributions out of our lottery funds every year. And that has, by the way, return on investment on that contribution, commissioners. So we didn't want to be in that situation. And we also have not put a price on this, correct? How's that going to be handled?
That will be part of the process, is we do require in a sale and purchase transaction, there be an appraisal, that we come to an agreement with whoever is acquiring for it, what they're going to pay for it. But again, we're looking for open-ended, what is the idea? What do you want to do with the property? What's it worth to you? We're then going to look at what it's worth to us and come to an understanding.
Okay. Also, gee, I just lost my train of thought. The group that's established to look at this will present the proposers all the information that we have currently accumulated about the condition and viability of this property. For instance, we have an appraisal and condition report. We have the presentation by Mr. Robinson from the facilities that he gave to this committee. That's available. Also, they should be able to go through the courthouse and view it for themselves. And on the outside ground, any geotech information that we may have as to the flow of the waters that could be underground in the Willamette River. All of that will be available, correct, Tony?
That is correct. We are going to include in the packet that 2022 appraisal that the county completed, a 2015 building assessment that was completed on the state of the buildings, heating systems, plumbing, electrical systems, all of that information, the geotechnical engineering work that was done in 2015, and a seismic evaluation report that was done in 2015. All of that material is going to be in the RFEI, and certainly any proposers are free to submit questions if they need additional information.
Good.
We will make that information available both to the proposer and any other potential proposers. And then if there is desire for a tour of the building, we would need to make arrangements. It's a challenging building, but I'm confident we can find a way to make that possible in a format that would be available to anyone that was desiring to do so. But I'd like to believe that the packet that I've prepared shows pretty clearly the present state and use and configuration of the building.
Thank you very much. Two commissioners are in the queue. Who's first? Commissioner West.
Tony, that was great. Good job. Honestly, really good job. And I like how you succinctly put this long document together before us just now. Really, thank you. I like the selection criteria. What I would like to see happen is innovators from the private sector come in and do what they do best, and to put their talents at work and to create something great for everybody that also can turn a profit. I think I like what you said. You like, it caught my attention. You said we can't just sell the house without the yard, and that includes Liberty Plaza. And maybe that includes, kind of what Mayor McGriff dreams it to be, but maybe it's something better. And I don't want to pretend like we should get in the way of whoever's making this effort to take on a complicated project like this. This is just enough insight, I feel like, and a roadmap to maybe get everybody where we want to go, but not so restrictive. Unless I'm wrong, maybe I'm wrong. It's not so restrictive where a private developer and a business entity couldn't come in and work with this. So I like it, and I think you did a really good job kind of highlighting it today, so thank you.
I would agree. Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, in the RFEI documents, the deadline for submission of concepts is 27 February. So my question is, what is the plan to widely disseminate this RFEI to make sure it gets in the hands of as many potential investors or buyers as possible?
Commissioner, that's a great question. I do want to note those timelines are tentative and hypothetical. There is
Okay.
some work we have to do as a county to get this out into the world. And so February 27th is a date I plucked off the calendar.
I see.
But
Okay.
to your question of how are we going to put this out there so that we maximize the number and quality of responses. The county will be publishing it on our county website. We'll be setting up a webpage for that. We will be publishing it in the Portland Business Tribune, which is a widely circulated local commerce newspaper. We will be publishing it on OregonBuys.gov. And while we are not in contract with any of our partners that have been involved to date, we would certainly hope that all of our partners that have been at the table as part of these conversations would do the legwork to share this with as many people as they can, and all of those folks that have been like, oh, we might be interested, so that they can look at what we're putting forth and determine whether or not they want to submit something.
Okay, so it'd be nice if we could widen that scope to California and Washington, because people who might be interested in this are not, not on every block. So let's look at that. But the other question I have is, if you want a motion, option 1, for example, today, I don't understand when we're going to be able to approve these timelines you have here. Anticipated schedule. When does that come back to us for approval?
The intention would be that the schedule would not, as that schedule is a hypothesis based on
Okay.
calendaring.
Okay. Well, okay,
certainly-
just as long as the staff understands that this is a very timely, sensitive thing. We move into our new courthouse, we move out of this in May, and we don't want it just sitting there for.
We're going
for
to adhere as closely to this timeline as we can.
Okay, well, in that case, I would support option 1.
Okay. Commissioner Savas, your light is on.
Yeah, so I think I understand where the Mayor McGriff is coming from with regards to wanting to retain Liberty Plaza. And I guess on Section 3, page 9, as Commissioner Scholl had pointed out and read, one of the criteria there is retention of the portion of the site known as Liberty Plaza. So that's clearly in there, and I would think that that was what the mayor was looking for, I believe. But the same token is, it is a finger on the scale, so to speak, in my opinion. But there again, it's one in which it is addressing the desires of the city of Oregon City, I believe. So with that said, in my earliest comments, I will just repeat them again so you know what I was referring to with regard to this is a bigger deal for the city of Oregon City than it is for Clackamas County. But there's a way for a win-win. And as I read through all this, and Tony, your explanations, and the way you articulated, thank you, I appreciate that. I guess as far as it's written and the date which it goes out, I guess I can find comfort there, but I can certainly find far more comfort knowing that at least there's only 2 of us here today that'll be here next year. But I would lean towards want to know who the selection, literally who the selection people are, the selection committee. It seems to me that if, let's just say Oregon City is not a respondent and doesn't, I think having some representation by Oregon City, or maybe a selection criteria of experts and another one of interested parties like the city of Oregon City. But I'm going to be an advocate for to make sure that there's a strong voice from the city of Oregon City. I'll just say that's where I am. But I think that this will meet the immediate needs. I think we have to list Liberty Plaza there to be transparent because it is part of the parcel. So I get the legal requirement to do that, and frankly, the transparency requirement to do that. So it's one and the same. So again, I just think that, we want to be partners. We want to be partners. And I think whoever, anyone who's ever dealt with any kind of an acquisition of property and foresees a zone change know that they're going to be awfully friendly to the city in which they're doing this, because at the end, ultimately, they're going to have a lot to say in how that's structured or how that goes through and the requirements. So, I think that having collaboration and agreement with all parties is the ideal situation. That's what I'm going to strive for. So,
Commissioner West?
Chair, I'd like to make a motion if you're ready to
Go ahead.
entertain. Chair, I move that we approve the draft request for the expressions of interest as proposed and direct staff to move forward with the process.
Seconded.
Commissioner West has moved we approve the draft request for expressions of interest as proposed and direct staff to move forward with the process, and Commissioner Scholl has seconded the motion. Commissioner Savas has talked a lot about that Oregon City probably has the greatest interest in that. I'm not in total agreement with that. This is a county-owned property since 1934. And we are instructed to build county courthouses according to Oregon revised statutes. The city of Oregon City has not been instructed to build, maintain, and operate courthouses. It solely rests with the responsibility of the county, of which we have paid for, long before I was born. And we'll be paying for it until a new owner is taken over. So I think there needs to be a balance. I do not want to see the scales tip toward one entity or another because they happen to be the loudest person in the room, and that is what this is boiling down to. Because I'm going to be gone next week, and you guys are going to have to figure it out. But I would really caution people to move forward. Just because the loudest person says, I want this, does not necessarily bring equity and fairness to the equation. Commissioner Savas.
well, I'm not sure I've heard anyone say, I want this.
I did.
Okay. I'm not going to disagree with that. I'm just saying I have not really heard that. But I will say that it's self-evident that we are seeking to dispose of the property in the building in a way that's economically and hopefully mutually viable for all of us, all parties. So therefore, the responsibilities, we are detaching ourselves from that property. So we're in the process of doing that. So therefore, it seems to me that, the city, again, I maintain, we can agree to disagree, but I maintain that this is a huge landmark, historical landmark in the downtown core of Oregon City. They will be experiencing a significant economic impact from all those employees that work down there daily, who visit those businesses and eat and get coffee and so I think we need to be mindful that while there is, an opportunity for really great things to happen, there's also the reality that economically, at least the local merchants that have patrons that are current employees. I mean, that's not to say that they can't go down the hill and get coffee and have lunch or breakfast at the same place they did before. But, location, and that's what this is all about, is a location. And so I'm being sensitive to the realities, and I want to make sure that the city of Oregon City is a partner. If I learned anything in my 14 years, build bridges, don't burn them, try to get along with your partners, and our cities are huge assets to our success.
Tony, would you take the poll? Tony, Andrew. Actually, I owed you that.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Madam Chair.
Aye. Motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much. Staff, go out and do your work, and hopefully we'll get somebody interested in this.
Darn right.
Yeah.
Chair, before you gavel down, I have one question I forgot to ask, just a technical question. Commissioner West made the motion and he used the word process. So I just want to know, when we say process, what staff can interpret process of? Is just the process of the RFI only and not all the potential dates?
So I was anticipating all of the potential dates, like the process of doing the RFI, getting it out, getting everything back. That's how I interpreted it.
Okay, so
And do the review.
that doesn't foreclose the opportunity to talk about selection committees and things like that. It doesn't foreclose that.
Yeah, I mean, we can bring that back. If you want to have that discussion about who's on the selection committee, we can bring that back.
Okay.
But
We have a motion on the table that's already passed.
It's
Commissioners.
passed. I was just wanting to understand what the definition of
I
that.
suggest you stand with that, and the new board can make any further decisions that need to be made on this.
Do we
No.
need further direction on, do you,
No.
No, I-
There's
okay.
not votes for it.
okay. Okay.
See no further business before this commission, we are adjourned.
thank you.